Welcome to Thank you, Commissioner Cragnati. Good evening. Welcome to the first meeting of the Glendale Historical Preservation Commission for the year 2023. It is, yay, Happy New Year, everyone. It is January 17th, and will you please call our roll? Oh, wait, no, I have to read my little script. That's my script, okay. Our agenda was posted outside City Hall about 48 hours ago. All meetings are broadcast live on Glendale TV, viewable on Spectrum Cable, Channel 6 and AT&T Universe, Channel 99. Meetings are also streamed live in high definition on the city's webpage, glendale.gov.live or youtube.com/myglendale. And on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire devices using a free app called ScreenWeave and choosing Glendale TV from the menu. Meetings are also archived on our website for viewing anytime at glendale.gov/agendas. You may call in this evening for any item on our agenda at area code 818-548-4013. DVDs and proceedings are available to purchase in the city clerk's office, and reach for other public comments. If you have also any questions, city clerk, you can call during business hours at area code 818-548-2090. All done? Perfect, okay. It is now time for our roll call.
Commissioner Yerka,
Here.
Commissioner Morgan,
Here.
Commissioner Cragnati,
Here.
and Commissioner Vartanian,
Here.
and Chairperson Doom.
Here. Thank you. We have 2 minutes to approve from our previous meetings in October and November. Are there any changes to the meeting?
Do chairperson elections first?
Oh, that's right, chairperson elections first. I'm sorry. It is now on our agenda to entertain motions on who wishes to chair this commission for this year.
I would like to nominate Chris Cragnati.
Okay. Do you accept, Mr. Cragnati?
I will accept the nomination.
Are there any seconds?
I second.
Okay. Any other nominations? Hearing none, nomination process is closed.
Wow.
You should make an acceptance, or not, a nominating speech at all?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
No remarks prepared, sorry.
Okay. We will now take a vote on nominating Mr. Cragnati for our future chairperson.
Commissioner Yerka,
Aye.
Commissioner Morgan,
Yes.
Commissioner Cragnati? No, I don't vote. You don't vote for yourself? Commissioner Vartanian?
Yes.
And Chairperson Doom?
Yes. How about that unanimous
Look
vote?
at that.
How about
Thanks,
that?
everybody.
If only the rest of government moved as smoothly.
Yes. For the sake of expediency, can I just stay in this chair and we'll switch next meeting? Okay, let's do that. All right, I guess I'm taking over, everybody. All right, so picking up where he left off, we have minutes to approve from our November 17th, 2022 meeting. Has everyone had a chance to approve or to review the minutes, and are there any changes?
Sorry, may I ask a question?
Yes, you may.
Do we need to nominate a vice chair?
Oh, we probably should.
Yes, we do.
That's right, because I was the vice chair. All right, thank you. Any nominations for vice chair? That person will take over in my absence. Or if
I
ever
will
have to-
nominate Commissioner Doom.
Oh, we'll go back and forth.
Okay.
That sounds like a good one to me. You accept?
Yes.
Awesome. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Yerka,
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan,
Yes.
Commissioner Vartanian,
Yes.
Commissioner Cragnati?
Yes.
Chairperson Cragnati.
All right. Housekeeping. I think we're good. Item 4A, any changes or modifications to the minutes from the last meeting?
I have none.
Great.
None.
Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second? Anyone?
I'll second.
Great. Thank you. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Yerka,
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan,
Yes.
Commissioner Doom,
Yes.
Commissioner Vartanian,
Yes.
and Chairperson Cragnati.
Yes. Okay, at this time, we're going to make a slight change to the agenda for the evening. We are going to be swapping items 7A and 8A. So after we visit with our board member commissioner comments, after we hear from our commissioners, we will be switching to item 8A and doing 7A after that. So item 6, do any of our commissioners have any comments?
I do.
Mike?
Excuse me. Happy New Year. My comments today are tinged with a little bit of sadness. Two great historic preservationists have recently passed, and if you would permit me, I'd like to recall a little bit of their deeds. First is Dr. William Lloyd Hitt, longtime Little Lander Historical Society member, former president of the Little Landers Historical Society, and director of Bolton Hall. He was a good friend. He passed on November 5th, 2022. Born in San Jose, he graduated Verdugo Hills Hospital, yes, in 1947. Served in the Korean War, received his doctorate of pharmacy in 1960 from USC. As mentioned, he was president of Bolton Hall. He worked with the Los Angeles Cultural Heritage on monument designations for Weatherwold Castle and the Blarney Castle in Tahunga, but he's mostly recognized for his work to save. The culturally significant contribution was his work to have the site of the historic Tuna Canyon detention station on the corner of Tahunga Canyon Boulevard and Latuna Canyon, recognized and preserved. Starting in 2006 with his friend Paul Susumi and the Japanese American community, Lloyd spent the next 10 years gathering information and interfacing with the city to establish its historical significance. Space was set aside for the property near the grove of old oak trees and designated as Los Angeles Historic Cultural Monument 1039 as a reminder of our World War II history of internment of Japanese Americans and others in a not-so-proud part of our history. Lloyd was survived by his wife of 66 years, Marlene. The other one is the sad passing of Frances Jean Maluccio. Born in LA in 1941, she moved to La Crescenta in 1967. She was a most avid volunteer, especially in the Historical Society of the Crescenta Valley, and worked 30 years for the Crescenta Valley Chamber of Commerce. Her dedication and volunteerism will be sorely missed, and I ask that the Glendale Historic Commission adjourn the meeting in their memory.
Thank you, Mike, for the nice tribute. And, our thoughts are with their families. So thank you for that, Mike. Comments, anyone else? Commissioner Yurka.
I have a question, and it's probably for Jillian Van Meiden. At the Sustainability Commission about 5 months ago, it was mentioned that there are certain circumstances under which commissioners can participate via Zoom if they're unable to be in attendance in person. And I just wanted to get more information about that. I don't know what the circumstances are. Thanks.
Members of the commission, Commissioner Yurka, on the first of the year, there was a Brown Act modification that was passed, and it allows under emergency circumstances as of January 1st, 2023, specified emergency circumstances, and then other circumstances which are non-emergency, but they're very specific, such as illness, care for a family member, and that could be a child or parental caretaking or other forms of caretaking. We certainly can provide some information to the commission. In fact, we're putting a package of information together for various commissions so that they understand what those circumstances are where it would be possible for a commission member to attend remotely. We'll provide that information. Yep.
Great, thank you. Thanks for that question. Anyone else? We're good? Okay, with that, we would like to move on to new business, item 8A, 1121 Cortez Drive, Glendale nomination and Mills Act application. Casey, you have a report for us.
I do. Good evening, commissioners. I have quite the audience for my first HPC meeting on my own.
Yes, by the way, we should make that announcement. Casey's here on her own. Thank you very much for that.
Item 8A is the Glendale Register Nomination Mills Act application for 1121 Cortez Drive. The building is located on a large lot in the Rossmine neighborhood of the district. It was not evaluated as part of the Rossmine Historic District. It's not visible from the street, as I'm sure you guys noticed when you visited and from the photo. The primary access to the lot is from Cortez Drive to the east. with a stucco and clay tile entrance portal, steps, and wrought iron gate, which allows access, and then a wrought iron gate and heavy vegetation shields the property the remainder of the way down Cortez Drive. 1121 Cortez Drive is a single-family one and two-story building constructed in 1925 and designed in the Spanish Colonial Revival style with Churrigueresque elements. A non-original walkway with koi pond and non-original curved steps with a curved cheek wall and landscape features lead to the primary facade and entrance. The building is clad in stucco with the low-pitched gable roof, clad in red clay tiles and deep-set multi-light casement windows and French doors throughout. A two-story mass projects at the center of the east facade with a non-original dental molding, which separates the first and second story, and then a cast concrete cornice, which can be seen here in these photos, wraps the building on all facades, and this is also non-original. The Churrigueresque details are visible mainly at the two entrances on the east and west facades. The entrance door here on the east facade is an arched double door surrounded by details of scrolls, leaves, and shields with a decorative balconyette above. A pair of human-headed lions perched on pedestals frame the entrance. These are non-original. And then there are deep-set, narrow stained glass windows with this iron grille detail, which are original. Much of the north part of the building is part of the 1985 and 2005 large-scale additions. It's generally simple in design, with wrought iron balconyettes at the second story being really the only ornamentation. And then, as you see on the right-hand side here, there is a one-story appendage with hip roof, which was also added in 2005. From the alley to the west, the property is enclosed by a stucco wall with wrought iron topper detail and access through a wrought iron entrance gate from the driveway. The west facade is a mix of two-story with one-story projections, which somewhat separates the facades into two sections. It's also clad in stucco with non-original cast concrete cornice and deep-set multi-light casement windows and French doors. Towards the north, a one-story projection, which was part of the 2005 addition, contains a wood entrance door with large central light and iron grille. That is the photo to the right here. And then further south, within the original footprint of the building, is an arched divided light double entry door set within this elaborate surround, including scrolls and floral elements with that balconyette really similar to that east facade. So these are more photos of the west facade, which has that narrow walkway. It's set pretty close to the property line along the west. And then this photo here on the right, I believe this one-story projection is that 1938 glass porch enclosure. Can't say 100% sure, but I feel like through my permit records, I am going to assume that's where it was. At the south, there is a landscaped area with non-original water feature and a pair of French multi-light doors, which allow access into the house. And then lastly, as part of the 2005 addition, the original detached garage was removed, and then this attached L-shaped garage with hipped roof was added at the north. The original owner of the house was Len C. Davis. Davis worked various jobs before becoming president and owner of Glendale's Grandview Memorial Park in 1924. Davis oversaw the construction of the mausoleum and crematorium, which is still extant on the site. You can see the photo here on the right, before leaving that position in 1930. The nomination does cite significance under Criterion 2 for its association with Davis, but there's not enough information to show that Davis was individually significant within the context of Grandview Memorial Park or within the cemetery's history in Glendale. And then, as noted throughout the presentation, the building has been dramatically altered over the years. In 1938, the enclosure of the glass porch took place on the west, and then in 1985, approximately 400 square feet were added to the north end of the building. And then in 1955, a pool was added to the east side of the lot. This side of the lot is generally the rear yard, as it has a deeper setback. And then in 2005, that pool was replaced with the current pool that's there, which also added a barbecue pit and a seating area. And then the largest addition, in 2005, approximately 2,100 square feet were added to the north end of the building. And then just to reiterate some photos, most of these portions of the building were non-original and is part of that 2005 addition. And then just photos of the rear pool and that seating area. And then furthermore, original features have been removed from the property over the years and non-original features have been added. This photo is from 1985. It shows the original simple concrete entrance steps with concrete rubble rock retaining walls and that wrought iron detail. You also see that the staircase was set further north than it currently is. And then circled here on the right, there's this one-story appendage, which we think was possibly a breezeway, which was also removed in probably 2005. And then you could see details as the shutters have been removed, and then the balconyettes have also been altered. And just a reminder of what that walkway looks like today with the koi pond, the curved walkway, and those really grand stairs. And then as evident in the previous photo from 1985, and then shown here in a photo from, we think, the 1930s, and a little boy who we don't know. The dental detail around that east projection and the cast concrete cornice are not original to the building. And then original details like the lamppost and simple entrance porch have been removed or replaced, and windows and doors have been replaced. It would also appear that the entrance portal along Cortez Drive, so if you look far into this corner of the photo, it's not 100% sure where Cortez Drive lies, but I don't think that portal is original. So the property is a large-scale, single-family residence that retains some integrity of feeling, setting, and location. The building you see today is vastly different in design, detail, and massing from the building that was constructed in 1925, and therefore the building has lost its integrity of design, material, and workmanship. Original design intent and these three pieces of integrity become integral when determining significance under Criterion 3 for its architecture, and the property does not retain any. Therefore, staff finds the property not eligible under any designation criteria for listing in the Glendale Register and recommends that the commission not recommend designation to City Council. We do have speakers, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. First off, any questions for Casey? Okay. We do have two speaker cards on this item. Michael Donna and Aparna Bargava. I'm sorry, let me read it, not typed. Bargava, is that right? Would you guys like to come up together or separately? Oh, a new one, sorry, she just handed it to me. Sorry about that. Tim Gregory. You said you'd like to go first, Tim? Okay, Tim Gregory.
Yeah, my name is Tim Gregory. I did a history of the house some years ago and did a recent sort of editorial on it in August of last year, which I hope you've had a chance to read. There's no question the house was altered in the 80s and in 2000s, but it's an axiom that if the original owner could come back, would he recognize it? And I think in this case he would. And the current owners are going to be talking more about the architecture, but I'd like to speak a little bit about association and feeling. These are two National Register criteria that are often largely dismissed by modern architectural historians because they're so difficult to define. I think the significance of the original owner, Len Davis, and his association with the development of the community has been rather shortchanged by the staff. I ran across a recent article by Catherine Peters Yamada on the Grandview neighborhood. She credits Len Davis, even though he only lived in Glendale for a short time, with being instrumental in integrating the Grandview neighborhood into Glendale by developing the Grandview Cemetery, causing it to become a local landmark with a small L and a center of visitation. The cemetery was founded in the 1880s, but it remained a raw plot of land on the outskirts of town with a few graves on it. That was until Mr. Davis poured $400,000, a lot of money in the mid-1920s, into the cemetery, building a grand entrance, planting hundreds of trees, and building the surrounding walls and fencing and all the existing funerary buildings, including the mausoleum. I don't know if you've seen the mausoleum. There was a picture of it just now, but it's over 1,000 feet long. It runs along the whole property line of the cemetery. It's about the longest or biggest single-story building I've ever seen. The two wings are not very distinguished architecturally, but the central portion is very reminiscent of the Davis house with its Churrigueresque entrance and the fenestration and the use of wrought iron. So I'm thinking it's probably had the same designer and builder, but we don't know who that was. The criterion of feeling is even more difficult to define, but it's one of those things you know it when you experience it. As I first walked onto the Davis estate from the street, I knew nothing about its history or ownership, yet I was really struck with how much the property exemplified the feeling of opulence and lavishness that characterized the 1920s. The landscaping is very impressive, although I know that much of it has changed over the years. But there are some olive trees on the property that are at least 125 years old, dating from the time the land was part of Judge Ross's olive grove. The house, although well-maintained, certainly doesn't look new, and its siting on the top of a hill gives it great prominence in the neighborhood, a fact that has been kind of lost by the tall vegetation that grows along the front property line. All in all, I find it's a very impressive property. I hope that you will consider both association and feeling, as well as architectural integrity in your deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Aparna and Michael, would you guys like to come up together or separate? Okay, together, cool. Thanks for coming, guys. If you don't mind stating your names again for us, that would be helpful.
Sure. Michael Dana.
Aparna Bhargava.
Thank you, guys.
So thank you, members of the commission and chair and vice chair, for hearing us today and taking some time with our application. Appreciate it. Thank you, Tim, for your learned words. We just add a few things in the capacity as owners, co-owner with my wife Aparna here. Certainly take issue with staff's kind of portrayal of Mr. Len C. Davis as somewhat insignificant. As Tim mentioned, owner of Grandview Cemetery, the oldest cemetery in our area, 20 years older than Forest Lawn, and in that decade between 1919 and 1930, this was a tremendous upgrade to the property, profound improvements, which still stand today, 1,000-foot long mausoleum, as we heard, pretty significant. And so I'm surprised that Mr. Len C. Davis is portrayed in this way. To me, he seems like he should be considered a very considerable, significant contributor to the early life of Glendale. And in regards to our submission, as a significant owner of the property. The second thing, and again, to kind of continue Tim's riff on feeling and association, which to me, and especially in a property of this kind of grand scale, I think becomes a really important factors. The idea of a property expressing historical significance, the feeling of a specific aesthetic of a time and place. It's something that you can see, and I brought some photos, which I guess I should have brought a slide projector or something. Anyway, here's a wonderful picture of Len C. Davis. And I guess I can pass these around, but, and I found this photo in the Keystone Pictures library, and then I took a photo this morning from the same approximate angle. What's interesting is I think this little boy here, very likely, I have no proof, but it's around 1930, and he's around the right age to be one of Mr. Davis's kids. And it's quite possible that that's who it is. But you can see, yes, lots of change, the vegetation. There is a new, and I can pass these around, or I can hold them, I don't care.
I think we can see them pretty good. And it's actually,
Okay.
you're doing a good job there because the cameras can pick them up.
I'm on TV.
You're doing great.
Wow.
Yes.
All right. So, yeah, you can see there's a new sidewalk there. There's a new crown molding, if that's the correct term, the thingy at the top under the roof. There's the frieze, but all in using original materials, using the same materials in the fully faithful spirit of the original vision of the house. It's all of the highest quality. It's all of great detail, and it fits perfectly with the spirit of this original style. and you can also see, by the way, that the windows, if you look at this picture, which, thank you, Casey, for putting up there for me, you can see the windows and doors are exactly the same. The divisions, the lights are the same. So the feeling, the sense of what you get when you look is the same. If we zip ahead to 1985, and again, a photo that I took this morning. And again, I kind of take issue with the portrayal of, like, it's changed, the masses of the building, the sense of it. When you walk up, to me, they're identical. The feeling that you get, yes, there's an added frieze. Yes, there's that added crown, whatever it's called. But the additions that have happened is simply, if I'm doing this on the right side, is a continuation of what's there, and in the exact same style. So instead of one bay with the window with the balcony, you've got three. So it's a continuation. It certainly, to me, continues the feeling of the house, and again, is faithful, has that identical sense of historic and architectural cohesion, something that's definitely has not been lost through these changes that have happened. And again, it's a grand house with the Charagoresque ornamentation and so on. The feeling and association with this specific time and place, to me, are fully preserved. I feel Mr. Davis would walk up and feel he was home. Finally, just on a personal note for us, Aparna and I moved to the Ross Moines district of Glendale because we fell in love. We used to live in Hollywood, in the hills, but we fell in love when we accidentally stumbled on Ross Moines. Our jaws dropped, like, wow, this is incredible. The just immaculate historic character of it, the pride that people take in their homes, and it's just so beautiful here. But there's something about the historic character of this neighborhood where you feel transported. You feel that if you were back 100 years, it would be the exact same feeling. This is something that we strongly feel that our house is an important part of Ross Moines. It's a major house in Ross Moines, a significant house. And on our lot, there are still trees that are in this photo, that these really old olive trees that were certainly there when Mr. Davis raised his children. As temporary stewards, unfortunately, but better for better or worse, present and temporary stewards of this place, we really hope for this designation so the house can be preserved as it stands. It's a landmark house on a grand scale, and we feel it should be a resource for all of Glendale, used for civic events, galas, tours, all of which we have actually done and welcome more of. And we've seen the joy in people's faces at the GEF Gala and the Historical Association Society galas that we've had. There's really something, there's a feeling of this grand sense of history that this house projects. Finally, the house celebrates its 100th birthday next year, so this would be a lovely present for it. And it's definitely time for another party at that point. So we really hope to see you all there. And thank you again for your time and consideration. And thanks.
Aparna?
I think Michael actually said everything that I had to contribute. So yes, I think he did a great job expressing what we both feel.
Well,
so.
he did do a very thorough job. Before you walk away, does anyone have any questions for our applicants?
Yes.
Vice Chair?
Thank you, Chair. May I ask, when did you purchase the house?
When did we purchase the house?
Yes.
2017.
2017. Have you made any changes to the house?
We have not.
No, okay. That's all. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, fine.
And I just had a quick question. I can't seem to find it in my report. Do you know the actual square footage of the house today?
I would say.
Or
that-
approximate?
I would say that it's probably about 6,500 square feet.
It's got that, what we were told was a well, it was a rumpus room in the original plan. It's the downstairs, it's an actual basement, which there's some suspicious little dumbwaiter. So we wonder if possibly it was, a prohibition-ish thing, but yeah. So I think if we include that, it ends up to be 6,500. If it's the main floor only, it's, as I recall, 5,200, the top of my head.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you have something to add? If you can add it, but we just need you to come up to the podium. Thanks, Tim.
Detail, but the LA County assessor says it's 5,406 square.
So that's what we'll consider the
Living
permitted
area,
square
right.
footage. Okay,
Yeah.
great. Thanks for that, Tim.
Thank you.
Any other questions for our applicants? Okay, thank you very much, guys. With that, we'll close the public hearing and begin our discussion. Would anyone like to go first?
I would.
Dive right in, Mike.
Though the staff has kind of let Mr. Davis off the hook, he rises, to my opinion, to a more significant level. In the 1920s, when Glendale was promoting the fastest growing city in America, Mr. Davis, who took Grandview, a small Glendale cemetery, and it was the only place, if you were in Glendale, that you would be buried, and bought it in 1919. And what they don't realize, he was in competition with Hubert Eaton, who in 1917 bought the Tropico Cemetery and then changed its name. He changed his name to Forest Lawn Memorial Park after Mr. Davis had changed it from Grandview Cemetery to Grandview Memorial Park. So there was kind of this thing between Mr. Eaton down at what? Competition, yes. Between, with the way that Mr. Davis, who took the cemetery and changed the whole idea from there, that has never been the same. The idea of a cemetery now is forever. His idea caught on, and it was the place to be buried until Mr. Eaton, because he had a hill, was able to convert Tropico Cemetery into a much larger one. But the mausoleum that he built was called the Grand Mausoleum, and it wasn't until later that Mr. Eaton at Forest Lawn built a much bigger Grand Mausoleum, which you see today. But the biggest problem for Mr. Davis was that he was constrained by the amount of land that he had. But people in Glendale took to his cemetery. The American Legion Post of Los Angeles bought a plot which they could have 11,000 internments. At the same time, in the 1920s, there were still Civil War soldiers, and the Nathaniel P. Banks Post of the Grand Army of the Republic, which were Union Civil War soldiers, bought a huge plot. The GIR owns the building at 902 South Glendale, still in existence. Their competition between the two of them made Glendale the place to go to be buried, putting Glendale on the map even today. And what I want to say is, if you look up, Mr. Davis was listed in John Calvin Scherer's History of Glendale and Vicinity, published in 1922. There are a lot of people in Glendale today that we think are much more important that were excluded from this book. So I think if he were around today and people realize the competition between Grandview and between Forest Lawn, they'd realize that he would have risen to a higher level than what the staff thinks he's at. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Can I ask a question?
You may.
Casey, my impression, and this has come up before, is that what you were saying in the staff report was there was insufficient information to find that he was a significant personage in Glendale. And it sounds like Michael, that you found a lot more
There's
information.
a lot more.
And is that?
I may not be eloquent, but
No. No, but so is everything, are all the sources from the Scherer book?
yeah, well, this section right here is Scherer. I mean,
And Scherer is talking about the competition between Forest Lawn,
yes.
and it was Grandview Memorial Park that
Right,
drove.
he changed the name
Yeah.
to Grandview Memorial Park. It was Grandview Cemetery. It was Tropico Cemetery. It was Mr. Davis who came in and said, you know what? We're not selling enough plots. What we need to do is change it to Memorial. And that started the competition between Forest Lawn and Grandview. And that's the way it is with all over today. Cemeteries are no longer called cemeteries, they're memorial parks. And that was started with Mr. Davis. So it continues. So he's
Yeah.
a lot more relevant today and should be listed a lot higher than he is. And I think on whatever was the second, I forgot what the.
But so that's fascinating, and I think is really important information for us to have. But I do want to say that it's been determined that it's not the job of staff to supplement the research. And so it's generous and lovely that you've done that, and that we have more information to consider for this. But I just wanted to indicate that that it wasn't a definitive, he doesn't matter. It was more insufficient information.
Yes, correct. So staff found that with the information provided in the nomination, verifying that information, that having Davis as the owner for 6 years and overseeing the construction of the mausoleum, being an owner of a significant property in the city does not indicate significance in the history or under our criteria. So with that information does not rise to the level of being eligible under that criteria.
Thank you. Do you have any other comments since you kind of started down that road, Catherine? Since you kind of jumped in, do you have any other comments, or do you want me to move on to someone else? Come back to you?
Yeah, why don't you come back?
Okay.
Why don't you come back to me?
Okay. Vice Chair, Lorna, anything?
Are we deliberating?
Yeah. Okay. We'll go to Lorna.
So I'll start by saying, I'm sorry I couldn't make it out to the property over the weekend due to personal commitments. I have been on the property more than once, and I do want to thank you very much for opening your home to the community, as you do often. And as you said, TGHS and other organizations have benefited from being able to hold, wonderful events on the property. It's always difficult, but at the moment, I think I need to agree with staff that I feel that overall, the changes that have been made to the property do render it a vastly different house than what was originally built. I think the fact that the addition to the north is about 50% of the size of the original house in and of itself, changes the overall property aside from some of the detailing that we talked about. Casey, if you wouldn't mind putting up the sales flyer from 1985. And so while I do agree, it is clearly your home currently is clearly a beautiful and very grand home. It's very impressive to walk onto the property. Everything about it is impressive. But I think the original home reflects the grandeur and opulence of the time that it was built in. I think this is the home that was built that reflects a grand home in the Ross Moines neighborhood in what was our year of build? 24, I guess. You said next year is 100 years. And I do personally feel that the property, in terms of a sense of feeling, I think walking onto that property would have a very different feel than walking onto the property today. So while obviously the entryways on both the east and the west with those Churrigueresque details are, absolutely stunning and exemplary for all the reasons that were pointed out in the staff report. I cannot support under criterion 3, but I would like to hear from my colleagues.
Thank you, Lorna. Nick?
Thank you. I appreciate your hospitality going and look around the house and opening the property to me. That was very gracious. I think I got a lot of steps in that day walking around your beautiful grounds. And I love the decorations. And your walkway, your koi pond, your pool. I'm just very jealous of your barbecue and outdoors. And your rose garden and the structure of the walls around the house and so forth. It is a beautiful home. I'm sorry I have not been to a party there. I don't live in Ross Moines. I believe that it is a great house for the Ross Moines area. And the tribute to Mr. Davis, I believe, while notable, and I appreciate Commissioner Morgan for all your assistance in writing more about Lindsay Davis, is a great contribution to our city. But for the Historical Preservation Commission, we are up here looking at homes. And I don't know if you watched any of our previous commission hearings. I encourage you to do so if you were bored one day and want to learn more about what we discuss when it comes to roof lines or walls or driveways or garages or attachments that are much smaller in nature that deal with the integrity and structure of the original house. And that's to be preserved. Your house today, if we were to start, this all over process, and this was 2023 looking at instructional homes, it would be a beautiful home for today, representing, I think, today's area. The changes, both cosmetic and addition, are too much beyond what our rules put for the Mills Act to follow. And I know for Mr. Christensen, the story of Mr. Davis, again, Mr. Davis's contribution to the city is the cemetery, Memorial Park, and his mausoleum. But this house he was briefly in for that period, I don't think measures up to the Mills Act, and I'm sorry I can't find myself to vote for it for that reason. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Catherine?
Thank you. I'm a huge fan of Scherer, so I'm really glad, and I'm a little embarrassed that I didn't dive into it to do some research on my own. And I do even, given my, my clarification about staff's role, I do feel that we have a tendency, not the commission, but in the staff reports, to kind of shortchange significant residents. So I find myself more persuaded by this significance based on what you were saying, and also just his presence in the Scherer volume. However, there is the question of the alterations and their impact on the property, and I find myself agreeing with Lorna about they really sort of, for me, transform the feeling of the house. And I like the way you put it, that it's grand in a kind of 1920s way, but the changes add grandeur. They also add a lot of sort of, I don't want to say complexity, but a lot of design elements where they're not. And one of the things that I find very striking about this house is the concentration of the elaborate detailing around the entrances. And then when you get those additions around the roof line, and then also the one that's lower down, I do feel that there's a simplicity to the property, even in the midst of its original grandeur, that I don't feel the same way. Oh, and I wanted to say that I was sorry I couldn't come and visit. I actually emailed the address I had from the Mills Act application, but it was kind of an odd address. I didn't hear back, so I assume you didn't get it, and I apologize. But the and also the size of the new addition, the demolition of the detached garage, which would have been a character-defining feature of the property, and the replacement not with another detached garage, but an attached three-car garage. It's just so different in scale from the original vision of the house. So there's the question of if it's significant for its association with an important person in Glendale's history, do the alterations, it still needs to maintain enough integrity for it to be eligible, even with that association. And I have to say, it's really borderline for me, but I'm inclined to think, I'm inclined to think that it is too transformed, which is another way of saying that, if the owner were to visit, that he might be a little bit more confused about the property than otherwise.
Thank you. I'm going to echo certainly what Catherine said and kind of what everybody's said. First of all, I think that yes, an argument certainly can be made for the importance of Mr. Davis to the community and certainly what he's done to the world of funerals and mortuaries and things. He's a trailblazer, that guy. But as Catherine was saying, we have. She started to say, I think we have 5 criteria for a property, one of which a property has to have in order for it to be considered. We have an important person, or we have an intact example, like an exemplary example of a specific style, or we have an important architect associated. Well, each of those, and there's 2 others that I won't go into, but each of those ends with and has significant integrity. The property, the house really does have to maintain, on top of everything else, significant integrity. And I did find, after seeing this, especially once I saw this photo compared to the way the house looks now, yes, the 2 are clearly related, but I think it's just kind of a little bit too hard to find. One of our jobs is to be able to walk onto a property and can we find the original historic resource? If something's been changed, is it still easy when you walk up to find exactly what was original? And kind of that whole north end of it is so different now that it becomes quite challenging to find out exactly where the boundaries are. As a point of reference, there's a commercial property down in the industrial part of South Glendale on the corner of Sonora and Flower. It was an old parachute building company, which is really cool. It's this really cool brick building. It probably has some really great stylized name that I can't recall at the moment. But it had a modification that was put on in probably the 60s or 70s, and it was put on the back of it. And it is completely and totally not at all related to the style of the building. It's glass. It's a big glass enclosure. It doesn't look anything like the building. But it was so different, and it had the benefit of being glass that you could walk past or drive past that property and very clearly see what the original resource was. And that's the type of situation we look for in homes that are modified is, can you walk up and still say, oh, I totally get it. I see where it was. I see where it began, where it ends. Totally get it. What's so wonderful and beautiful about your house is that someone took those design elements, spread them out, worked with them, modified them a little bit here and there, and created a whole other thing that in and of itself is stunning. I mean, it's a stunning home. That's sort of the hard part I think some of us face, is that we're not here to, I wish we could, grant the Beautiful House Award. We're not doing that. And that's not our purview. We really are we have one specific mandate. And nothing we say here or decide here will never detract from the glorious home that you guys have, and your graciousness to invite people in is so appreciated. And so I do feel like I'm certainly on board with, unfortunately, saying that I don't think it maintains enough of its integrity anymore. So with that, I think we can do I entertain a motion? May I entertain a motion on this one?
Make a motion.
Go for it.
I move that the HPC recommend to the City Council that the property at 1121 Cortez Drive not be designated a historic resource in the Glendale Register of Historic Resources based on the findings identified in the staff determination. and that the city not enter into a Mills Act contract with the property owners for property tax savings. I'm sorry, I have to be the one to make that motion.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Catherine. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Yurka?
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan?
Reluctantly, yes.
Commissioner Doom?
Unfortunately, yes. Since we're using
Commissioner Vartanian?
modifiers.
Yes.
And Chairperson Doom. Cragnotti.
Yes.
I have to practice.
Thank you again for bringing it forward, though, folks, and for inviting us over to visit. It was a treat.
Thank you.
Yeah, yes. Okay. Moving backwards on the agenda to item 7A, 1642 Central Avenue and 1608 Gardena Avenue, design review case, including final environmental impact report. Do we have a staff report? Looks like we have someone from the planning department. Is that right?
Yes, we do.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, congratulations.
Thank you.
Allow myself to set myself up here briefly.
Go for it.
In just a quick moment.
Cue the elevator music. Mm-hmm.
And Ms. Conley, would you kindly fire up my PowerPoint presentation? Yes, I apologize. It should be available.
Almost ready, folks. Thanks for your patience. There we go.
So once again, good evening, newly elected chair. Congratulations once again. And the members of the commission. The next project involves a design review application and an associated EIR for a project located at 1642 South Central Avenue and 1608 Gardena Avenue. On a very high level, the project proposes to demolish all the buildings on site and construct a new approximately 40,000 square foot, 5-story, 31-unit affordable rental housing project. And I apologize for the technical difficulties. Let me try the mouse. And the clicker is not working.
Casey, you can advance it?
I'll just kindly say next.
Great.
And there's going to be some animations where I have to tell you to hit. Please hit
Happy
the
to be
clicker.
helpful.
Great.
Thank
Teamwork.
you. We'll adapt. The subject property is generally located in South Glendale. Please, next slide. And on a lot zone SFMU, which is shaded yellow, which is on this slide here. The property is slightly under 10,000 square feet. It's located on the southeast corner of South Central Avenue and Gardena Avenue. And it's located in the Tropico neighborhood and the South Glendale Community Plan area. Kindly click. Surrounding zones consist of IMUR, other SFMU zone properties, as well as the transportation zone. Next slide, please. This is an aerial of the general neighborhood, and once again, the subject property is yellow, shaded yellow on this slide, and the surrounding land uses include industrial, commercial, which are highlighted in purple, other residential, which is shaded in brown, mixed-use commercial residential, which is shaded in red at the top, and the Glendale Transportation Center and the Southern Pacific Railway, which is blue on the, I guess on the left-hand side. Next slide, please. And please hit the clicker. This slide is an up-close aerial. The property is developed with a craftsman-style dwelling constructed in 1913, which with an address of 1642 South Central, which is shaded in blue. along with a smaller dwelling addressed as 1608 Gardena, which is shown in green, and a detached garage shaded in brown. Both of these, which the 1608 Gardena and the detached garage, were both constructed in 1923. Next slide, please. These are photos of 1642 South Central, which was constructed in 1913. As mentioned before, the site's located in the tropical neighborhood of the South Glendale Community Plan, which a historical context statement was prepared by HRG in 2014 for the community plan, and established a theme of the early development and town settlement, which is between the period or the years of 1872 to 1919 for properties associated with the early history of Glendale and Tropico. 1642 South Central's 1913 date construction places it within this contextual theme specifically. The survey by HRG identified 1642 South Central with a status code of 5S3, appearing eligible for listing for the Glendale Register. 1642 was found to be increasingly rare example of early residential development in Tropico, which links it to a broad cultural, social, and historic heritage of Glendale, particularly of the tropical area prior to its annexation to Glendale. Next slide, please. These are photos of 1608 Gardena and the garage, both built once again in 1923, are considered under the theme of pre-World War II automobile suburbs, which has the period of, or the years between 1919 and 1944. Although on the same lot, 1608 Gardena and the garage were constructed after the period significance of 1642 South Central, and after when Tropico was annexed by the city of Glendale in 1918. Based on the registration requirements established in the context statement and the methodology of the survey, 1608 Gardena and the garage do not contribute to the historical character of the property, and they do not have, they have not acquired any historic significance in their own right. Next slide, please. Just a brief history and project background. During 2018, a demolition clearance application was proposed without a replacement project, which the director of CD at the time determined that a further CEQA review was necessary. And the applicant at the time, which was a different property than the current applicant for this evening's project, soon after appealed, which in 2019, the city council concurred with the director's determination that additional environmental review would be required to demolish 1642 South Central. And as a result, an ER was conducted for this evening's design review application. Next slide, please. HBC's requests this evening are to review and decide upon two items, which include, once again, the final EIR and the design review of the new building. Because the project's design cannot be acted upon without the HBC's decision or determination of the EIR, this evening's discussion should focus on the EIR first before rendering decision on the design review application. Next slide. And for the general audience and viewers, the following slides will provide a quick synopsis of the purpose of an EIR, followed by topics discussed within the environmental document presented before you tonight, as well as the alternatives identified and the findings of the EIR. And just to briefly break into what is the purpose of the EIR, which is an EIR is an informal document, is a informational document to disclose information to decision makers, stakeholders, and to the public to, one, analyze the environmental effects of the proposed project, two, indicate mitigation measures to avoid or minimize the potential significant environmental effect, and three, identify reasonable alternatives to the project that would avoid or substantially lessen the significant effects of the project. Next slide, please. One of the requirements by CEQA guidelines is to describe, once again, reasonable alternatives to the project and identify ways to mitigate and avoid the significant effects of a project. Click the mouse, please. Three alternatives were identified within the EIR, which were one, the no project alternative, two, the reduced density relocation on-site alternative, and three, the reduced density existing location alternative. Next slide, please. And just to kind of give you a brief overview, the first one being the no project. CEQA requires that among the reasonable range of feasible alternatives, that a no project alternative be evaluated. This assumes the project site would retain the existing single-family dwellings on the property as well as the garage. The no project alternative would not result in development of the 31-unit rental housing building with affordable units. Next slide, please. Moving on to alternative 2, please click the mouse. The reduced density relocation site alternative would move the resource to another location on the property. Once again, please click. Demo 1608 Gardena Avenue and the existing garage, and I apologize, click one more time, and significantly reduce the project size from 31 units to approximately 15 units with an approximate 8-space subterranean garage. The reduced density of 15 unit is an estimated figure which was calculated by the allowable density on the remaining buildable area if 1642 were to remain and be relocated on the site. Alternative 2 preserves the on-site location of 1642 South Central Avenue and therefore would eliminate the significant impact related to historic resources. Realistically, the count would be reduced beyond 15 units because as the project incorporates setback, separation, circulation around within the building, a driveway ramp into the subterranean garage, amenities for the building, and even to satisfy other code requirements, this estimated figure would be significantly reduced and lower than 15 units and would be less effective in assistance of the city achieving its citywide housing and RHNA goals. It's just the general goal for the citywide. Next slide, please. Moving on to alternative 3. This is reduced density existing location alternative, which will retain the 1642 South Central as its existing location. Please click the mouse. Which would include the demolition of 1608 Gardena Avenue and the existing garage, and then once again, please click. And to significantly reduce the project size from 31 units to approximately 11 units, and with a subterranean garage with 8 parking spaces. And much like alternative 2, alternative 3 would preserve 1642 South Central Avenue and therefore eliminate the significant impact relating to historic resources. Also similar to alternative 2, the estimated 11 units is an approximate figure of allowable density on the remaining buildable area. And 2, realistically, this count would be further reduced as once again, if it were to provide the setbacks, the circulation internally, externally, its building amenities and building ramps, et cetera, et cetera. Next slide, please. Pursuant to the requirements of CEQA guidelines, if the environmentally superior alternative is the no project alternative, the EIR shall also identify an environmentally superior alternative among the other alternatives. The environmentally superior alternative is the alternative that best avoids or lessens any significant effect of the project, even if the alternative would impede to some degree the attainment of the project objectives. Next slide, please, and then click the mouse. The EIR identified alternative 2, which was reduced density relocation on site, as the environmentally superior alternative because 1, it eliminates the significant and unavoidable impacts associated with the demolition of 1642 South Central. And 2, it meets more of the project objectives compared to alternative 3, as it will allow more affordable and market rate residential units on the site and help the city achieve its regional affordability goals. Next slide, please. As clarification, the staff report included a typo identifying the environmentally superior alternative. While the reduced density relocation alternative is still identified as the superior alternative, the staff report mistakenly identified this as alternative 3, which correctly, this alternative is alternative 2, so please excuse any confusion this may have caused. So the correct wording in the staff report should read as alternative 2, the reduced density relocation on site as the superior alternative. Next slide, please. Moving forward, the EIR discussed 2 topics, discussions, which were 1, cultural resources, and 2, noise and vibration. Next slide, please. Which the demolition of 1642 South Central will result in a significant and unavoidable impact to cultural resources. Please click the mouse, thank you. If HBC is inclined to certify the EIR as proposed, mitigation measures have been included, calling for documentation of the historic resource, which the applicant shall undertake a historic American building / a historic American landscape survey, documentation of the building's features, as well as preparation of a set of measured drawings depicting the size, the scale, and dimension of the resource. While this mitigation doesn't avoid significant impact, it would lessen the impact via documentation. Next slide, please. 1608 Gardena and the detached garage were built after the annexation of Tropico in 1918 and are considered under the theme of the pre-World War II automobile suburbs between the years of 1919 and 1944. The EIR identified 1608 Gardena and the garage as modest examples of craftsman-style design lacking in abundance of design features that make 1642 South Central a significant example of the style. And if you can please click. As a result, pardon me. As a result, 1608 Gardena and the garage do not contribute to 1642 South Central Avenue's association with the development of the city of Tropico and its period significance of 1913. Next slide, please. And in regards to noise and vibration relating to short-term construction, construction would approximately take 18 months. Short-term noise impacts would be associated in two main areas, which one is the transportation of equipment and materials, and two, demolition and excavation, grading and construction. Next slide, please. For construction noise, while Glendale Municipal Code does not include standard criteria for actual construction noise impact, the Federal Transit Administration thresholds were used to analyze various phases of construction, such as during demolition, site preparation, grading, and building construction and paving, which excavation and grading phases tend to generate the highest noise levels because of earth-moving equipment is the noisiest construction equipment. Please click the mouse. It is expected the average noise levels of the nearest sensitive use, which is the single-family home to the south, addressed as 1616 North Gardena Avenue, would range from a dBA of 69 to 83 dBA. Next slide, please. Using FTA's 90 dBA threshold, the noise level is not expected, it will not be exceeded. However, regulatory framework by the Municipal Code for Exterior Noise Standards identify that maximum exterior noise levels is 55 dBA during daytime hours and for single-family uses. And any exceedance of this noise by more than 5 dBA would be considered an impact. Next slide, please.
Can I ask a question about that?
Absolutely.
slide? I was just wondering about the average distance of 85 feet
Sure.
from 1616 Gardena. What does that mean?
Because construction doesn't always happen in one area, construction occurs throughout the site. So as an equipment were to move across the site, it's not always going to always be by one property line. It would move across the whole site. So the consultant for the noise that generated this report, based upon the average of 85 feet. So that's what that means.
Sorry, so at some moments it might be closer than 85 feet, and some moments it might be much further than 85 feet, and then they come up with an average for that.
That's correct. That's correct.
So is this just like the middle point from the resource? I mean, sorry, not from the resource, but from 1616 Gardena. Like it's 170 feet away, so you just kind of cut that in half, and it's average 85 feet.
I can't speak for the professional who had actually generated.
Okay, I
this.
can ask later. Thanks.
Continuing on the slide, please click the mouse. Because there's a high range of construction noise, on the high range of the construction noise that will be generated, which will be from 77 to 83 dBA, construction noise will be increased 5 dBA above the ambient noise levels that were measured at the site. And as a result, you can see highlighted in red, the temporary noise construction impacts will occur for the abutting residents at 1616 Gardena and the residences identified on El Bonito. Next slide, please. Short-term impacts concerning vibration were analyzed for damage and annoyance thresholds. In short, the results of the study identified the potential for vibration noise would occur for the two immediate adjacent properties, which are, please click the mouse, for the commercial property at 1638 South Central, as well as the residents at 1616 Gardena. And please click the mouse. The perception of annoyance would exceed the thresholds for the abutting residents on Gardena, as well as the residences on El Bonito. Within the EIR, mitigation measures have been included, calling for construction noise and vibration controls to be reviewed and improved prior to building permit. And some of these, but not limited to, include construction contractors shall ensure that a minimum of a 12-foot high ground noise barrier be erected. The use of equipment that generates lower vibration levels, such as rubberized tires as opposed to metal tracks. Truck haul routes, avoiding residential areas whenever feasible possible, and not using heavy equipment within 5 feet of any of the neighboring properties. A detail of these mitigations were included with the mitigation monitoring reporting program, which was attached to your packet this evening. And next slide, please. Because determination of the environmental document should first be focused for the discussion this evening, and prior for design review, staff believes at this moment would be a logical break in staff's presentation to answer any questions regarding the EIR. And if the commission agrees, city staff and the EIR consultant are available for any discussions. And of course, if you'd like me to continue to move forward with the design review, I did provide a brief presentation, but I think this would be a logical stop just to break in the discussion of the bulk of the item this evening.
Thank you. Catherine?
I don't want to hog
Please start.
hog the mic.
We're counting on you.
So there's not going to be a separate presentation by the consultant on the EIR. This is the presentation.
We do have the consultant for the EIR that prepared it
Right,
this
but
evening.
there's not an additional presentation. So the questions I have, I should ask now.
Absolutely.
Okay,
yeah,
great.
Yeah. Okay,
thanks. So I have some questions about the staff report first.
Sure.
Because I did notice that basically the only change from the December to the January staff report was the addition of the unit count for alternatives 2 and 3 as approximate, because they weren't described as approximate in December. And also they're not described as approximate in the EIR. So I'm just wondering why the sudden change to thinking of them as, like you said, and it sounds like the way you were presenting it, it's not even approximate. It would be much less than 15 or much less than 11, and I'm just wondering where that comes from.
No, there were some thoughts that if we made it a definitive unit count, meaning under alternative 2, for example, which is relocation, that it will absolutely result in 15 units, which is not necessarily true. I mean, because if they were to redesign it, we don't know exactly how it's going to be designed, as I mentioned in the presentation, whether it's going to be a building separation from 1642 South Central, required circulation for fire or building and safety, a driveway ramp, which would first take access from a street, and then take portions of the first level and ramp down. So this approximate of 15, it was really just calculated upon what is the maximum allowable density of the remaining buildable area.
But it could be 15 or could be 11.
Sure. It depends. I mean, it can be drastically reduced, but more than likely, I mean, even if you were to cram each unit compartment box, I mean, that's all we're talking about. But in reality, there's going to be amenities. There's going to be hallways. There's going to be utility closets. There's going to be whatever goes into a building to make a building that's habitable and livable and even enjoyable. And as these things kind of get fit and built in and baked into this project, it's more than likely going to be lower. I mean, it was just more of a clarification that the unit count, it's going to be, I mean, it will be reduced.
Or, well, it could be. I mean, it's hard to say, but one thing that struck me is, so the project is 31 units, including 3 very low income. Alternative 2 is 11 market rate and 4 very low income. Alternative 3 is 8 market rate and 3 very low income. That is unusual, I think.
And I thought about this. It's because the original proposal, they're proposing, I think it's a 10%, 11% affordable, and they're offsetting that with in lieu fee to help pay for the affordable. I mean, they still have the option of still providing, but they can also pay into that bank and offset whatever they're required. So I didn't want to say that they're going to pay for that exactly or what proportion it would be. So that's why the affordable amount as proposed is at, and I can still clarify, I can look at the notes here. I think it's 11, 10, anywhere from 10 to 11%, and even to meet its obligation of 15%, that's offset by a fee.
Okay, but they're not required to provide a fee for 4 very low income units for a project that's only 15, right? So where's the number 4 coming from? That's a lot of affordable units. It's more, so, I mean, so basically Alternative 2 provides more, it better meets the city's affordable housing goals than the project.
I will get to my notes, and if we could move on to this one. We can definitely revisit this, yes.
Okay. But the other, I mean, just one further point about that is, I assume that the project, I mean, I think it says this in the report, that the project, they're applying for a density bonus. They've already applied. Presumably, they could apply for a density bonus for Alternative 2 or Alternative 3, which I think means that actually, so you say that that's the maximum density, but if there's a density bonus, then it's not the maximum density. And they could have more, they could be able to build 15 units because they would be granted incentives or concessions, right?
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay. Okay. All right. So if we could go back to that at some point. So I had a question about in the staff report under on page 7. Oops. Just real quick. Okay. It's where you talk about the environmentally superior alternative.
Yes, the very bottom of page 7.
Sorry about that. And can you just tell me what you're saying there? I just found it a little hard to parse.
Sure. By CEQA guidelines, it requires us to analyze feasible alternatives, and with the goals of to lessen or avoid significant impacts, which is identified to retain the building on site. And Alternative 2 says to retain it but relocate it on site, and Alternative 3 is to retain an existing site. So CEQA requires to identify what is the superior, meaning which would result into the least amount or avoids or can mitigate the most. But however, even if it does reduce some of the attainable objectives of the project, which one would result in the least environmental impact or mitigated? And the EIR identified Alternative 2 because as moving the building, then additional more units would be able to accommodate on that buildable area as opposed to 3.
But that has nothing to do with whether it's environmentally superior, right? I have a hard time understanding why Alternative 2, which requires moving the resource to locate it in a different position from which it historically existed, would be superior to leaving the resource where it has been for 110 years.
So as identified in the presentation, CEQA identifies that even if the objectives were to be reduced to some certain level, it should identify which one would result into the least amount, but kind of give that balance to meet most of the objectives of the project. So moving it would achieve most of the goals in that balance. Because the project alone, it would result into significant impacts through cultural resources and noise and vibration. Okay? Alternative 2 would retain it, and so forth and so forth. I hope I may have answered your question there.
Kathy, can I ask a question?
Please.
Of you, actually, of
Oh,
where you're heading. Of where you're heading with that. So I guess I'm trying to kind of come up with understanding of what exactly your position is. Are you saying that the EAR, the overriding factor here should be that any modification of the house, the structure, moving it, doing whatever, anything besides leaving it where it is, the EIR is ultimately saying that any change to it is environmentally detrimental to the point where nothing else should be considered?
No, I'm just saying that that leaving the house where it is, I just don't see how that can't be the environmentally superior alternative than to moving it on site. And, if it better meets the project objectives, that's not really about environmental superiority. That's a different question. And I think it's also important, while the EIR requires, the EIR, in an EIR, you have to identify an environmentally superior, what the environmentally superior alternative is short of the no project alternative. But I think it concerns me that the staff report doesn't mention that it's also required under CEQA that the environmentally superior alternative be selected if it would reduce project impacts and if it's feasible. So I'm surprised by the neutrality of the report rather than the recommendation for the environmentally superior alternative. But in addition, I think that I just don't buy that moving the resource can be environmentally superior than leaving it where it is.
Okay.
If I may.
Yeah.
So I think I would agree with you if I'm following your line of thinking. It seems to me that in the EIR, that it has been stated that alternative 2 and 3 would both reduce the environmental impacts equally because they would each be a smaller project and they would each have shorter construction periods. So from an environmental impact perspective, I'm reading that those two impacts will, now I guess we could argue that alternative 3, because it would be a smaller project, would have potentially an even shorter construction period, right? And we would have even fewer units. So the environmental impacts are further reduced than alternative 2. And I think in both instances, what we're being told is that the impacts related to construction noise and vibration would remain significant and unavoidable even with implementation of the mitigation measures in both instances. So I think I agree with you in terms of environmental impacts. They're basically the same with either project, but now as I'm talking it through, alternative 3 does seem superior because of the smaller size and by extension, the shorter period of time to build a smaller project. So that seems further reduced. Also, both alternatives eliminate the significant and unavoidable impact of demolition of a rare historic resource. So that's established. Okay. Are we good there?
We
Eric,
have an additional
something.
staff person to continue the report.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. I actually couldn't have said it better than Lorna just did, for the most part. So the reason why that alternative is the environmental superior alternative under CEQA is that it does eliminate the impacts from the project to a lesser degree, gets rid of the historic impacts to it. It does lessen the impacts of the noise as well, but it does obtain more of the project objectives than the other alternative 3. That's why it's considered under CEQA as the environmentally superior. And to get to your point about the issue of requirement of selecting an alternative, the CEQA does not require you to pick the lesser impact alternative. It just is providing you information regarding all the alternatives and what the impacts of those should you choose one or the other alternatives. It doesn't mean you have to pick that one because it results in fewer impacts. It's just providing you the information so that you can make a more definitive choice.
I don't think that's true. I think that we need to select a project that reduces impacts, an alternative to the project that meets most of the project goals and is feasible if it reduces project impacts.
Well, you're not required to under CEQA law, but the information is there to provide you guys with, the commissioners, with a look at if this project was ultimately the one that was built, what would the impacts of that project versus the other project? Nowhere in CEQA does it require you to pick the environmentally superior alternative of a project. Now, there's statement of overriding considerations that need to be considered when you approve a project, and those depend on which alternative you ultimately select in terms of what those overriding considerations are.
So maybe by law, it's not a requirement, but if the term environmentally superior is the term that's being used, and again, I'm not a CEQA expert by any stretch, it seems to me that we should select the environmentally superior option. And if a smaller project further reduces construction impact, because it would theoretically have a shorter duration, due to the smaller size. It seems that would probably be environmentally superior.
Well, it's defined as being environmentally superior, and it's a decision of the commission to weigh in on the impacts of each one of these different alternatives that you're taking a look at tonight. So, depending on what the level of impacts are, then the statement of overrides would be a little bit different if you selected the project which results in the demolition of a resource, or the alternatives which would maintain that resource and just have different impacts related to noise. So the statement of overrides would be a little bit different depending on which alternative is selected.
So I just wanted to add Lorna, that your point about the reduced short-term noise impacts, I think, is a good one. But I was also just thinking about the environmental benefit of leaving the resource where it has been for 110 years. So according to Public Resources Code, sections 21002 and 21081, the fundamental mandate of CEQA is that, quote, public agencies, or a fundamental mandate, is that quote, public agencies should not approve projects as proposed if there are feasible, sorry, this isn't a quote. Public agencies should not approve projects as proposed if there are feasible alternatives or feasible mitigation measures available which would substantially lessen the significant environmental effects of the project. I read that as we are required, if it's feasible, to adopt one of the environmentally superior alternatives. I just don't see how else to understand that.
Well, I can ask Jillian.
Well, she's going to come up.
Hi, Jillian.
Good evening, members of the commission. Jillian Van Mine, Chief Assistant City Attorney. I want to help provide some clarification. Certainly, the quotation to the Public Resources Code is important because that's the overarching principle that we're talking about here is preservation and protection of the environment. But when you go into the specifics of the guidelines that are used for purposes of determining how to evaluate an alternative or alternatives that are required to be presented, I just want to tell you what it says. So this is the CEQA guidelines section 15126.6a, and it states, and this is pertaining to the selection and analysis of alternatives, an EIR shall describe a reasonable range of alternatives to the project or the location of the project which would feasibly attain most of the basic objectives of the project, but would avoid or substantially lessen any of the significant effects of the project, and evaluate the comparative merits of the alternatives. So these are these concepts that have been referenced both by Mr. Joe and by Mr. Kraus. So that comparative analysis. But what is the ingredient here that is important, and what Mr. Joe and Mr. Kraus indicated, is that you are looking at whether or not you're taking into consideration how many of the project objectives are being met by the project. So if I could just continue. An EIR shall not consider every conceivable alternative to a project. Rather, it must consider a reasonable range of potentially feasible alternatives that will foster informed decision-making and public participation. EIR is not required to consider alternatives which are infeasible. So, again, it sort of echoes what Mr. Kraus was saying, but that's a quote from the guidelines. So you look at, you select an alternative, is it feasible? So what does feasibility mean? That's capable of being implemented, taking into consideration technological and geological and other factors that might affect its implementation. So there's that feasibility component that you need to take a look at. And then you take a look at what the basic project objectives are that have been identified. So those two things, both the selection of the project alternatives and the selection of the objectives and the selection of the alternatives have to work together, because you're required to sort of take a look at those things at the same time when you're deciding whether or not it's more appropriate to approve the project or approve one of the identified alternatives. And that alternative has been identified. Why? Because it reduces or avoids an identified significant impact, and it is feasible. So hopefully that's helped to clarify some of the issues related to the selection of alternatives and why certain alternatives were teed up.
But there's
Thank
no,
you.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
But there's, sorry, do you want to go?
Yeah. No, I just wanted to quickly, so the definition of feasibility or feasible is capable of being implemented. So
Taking into consideration, and I'm not quoting it directly, there is a definition of feasibility within CEQA. So I'm just paraphrasing right now. And so it's taking into consideration technological, economic, and other factors.
Legal, yeah.
Yes, exactly. So that's what, and I can look it up and provide that for
So,
you. if
but
it's
I
important.
guess what I'm getting at is it's fair to say that both alternatives are either alternative, they're both feasible. That's been pretty much established. Okay.
Correct. In order to have been selected and evaluated further, that's part of the screening process when you're looking at the myriad alternatives to a particular project. Some of them may be screened out, and one that was screened out here was developing the project on an alternative site. Obviously, if a property owner doesn't have control over an alternative site, you can't have that as an expectation. That's not reasonably feasible for them to do that. So that was a screening process. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Sure.
Catherine, did you have any question for Jillian while she's here?
No, that's, yeah, that's.
Thank you.
Oh, I did have a question about, I do have a lot of questions. I mean, this is very
That's the point,
complicated, and,
yes.
you know, I've also never dealt with noise and vibration. Well, I've paid attention to vibration impacts, but never noise impacts. So the alternative two, where the resource would be relocated on site, where is the proposed new construction? Would it be between the resource and Gardena?
When you say Gardena, you're talking about 1616 Gardena?
No, I'm talking about I'm talking about 1632. So if it's going to be moved to the corner, to I guess like the northwest corner, Yeah, I think it's slide, I don't know what slide it is.
I think it's just being moved, I was confused about that too. I think it's just being moved forward a few feet on the property from its current
Right.
location.
So it would be more in the northwest corner. So would the so this clearly, the 15 units would not be between the resource and Gardena, is that right? Or is that still open?
Well, when we analyzed it, we were, as Board Member Vartanian mentioned, it was more close to South Central, to move along closer to the street where it has its existing street frontage. So that's where we're looking. So it would be between the existing resource, closer to South Central, and then to the southern property line or along Gardena, yeah.
Sorry, so what I want to know is, this slide shows the 15 units behind the resource. So there is no proposal to wrap the 15 units around the resource so that it would be between the resource and Gardena Avenue.
Yeah, it's a hypothetical to try to maximize as many units there as possible.
So that
because
might happen.
I doubt that. I mean, we can ask the developer, but I mean, we're talking about existing setbacks along the street. I mean, how many units in relief can you get there? I mean, I think when we analyzed it, we're talking about, well, how do we gain is most of the project objectives, which is basically they're I mean, one of their objectives outlined in their application is to help achieve the city's goals as far as housing and its RENI's numbers and affordable units and so forth. Moving it closer to, Gardena in that smaller setback area, I just don't think that would make design sense. But as we analyzed it, it would be in that larger area.
So when you say it moving, are you talking about the units or the resource? I'm sorry, I'm just having trouble following what you were saying. So there's no chance.
Well, you were mentioning the projects. So we're talking about where are we constructing projects. So what I'm talking about is moving, as depicted on the screen right here.
Yeah.
This hypothetical number, based upon the maximum density allowable on this remnant area, we're talking about building it at that location. I'm not talking about the house. Yes, we're moving it as depicted on there closer to Central, and that's how we analyzed it.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Any other questions at this point? Or shall we move forward with the rest of his presentation?
Oh, no, I have a lot more questions. Well, why don't you do the design thing, and then because maybe some of the speakers who come up will address some of my questions, or maybe it'll be more appropriate to ask it of them.
You can
Thanks.
continue.
Okay, pardon me. Next slide, please, Ms. Conley. And this will be just a brief overview. First, I'm going to begin with the site plan, which this is the site plan, the first level, with the South Central Avenue being on the left-hand side, which would be to the northwest, and Gardena would be the southwest as well. The project will occupy majority of the site and will generally follow the rectangular shape of the lot. Zero setbacks are provided from South Central, Gardena, and the eastern property line, and approximately 5 feet from the southern interior property line. And that's shared with the residents at, I believe, if my memory serves me correct, 1616 Gardena, which is the smaller house. Traffic circulation into the subterranean garage will be taken from a new driveway, which is taken from South Central, which is on the top portion of the screen. Next slide. The mass and scale of the proposed project would be a 5-story building, which is consistent with the existing zoning. The adjacent properties are developed with an industrial use to the north and west, single-family residences to the south, and the Larry's Area and Transportation Center to the west. The massing of the northeastern facade are broken into separate volumes, which includes recessed volumes to accommodate a stair elevator tower, as well as an outdoor garden terrace at the second floor level that is open to the sky. Next slide, please. The upper floor levels includes a series of recessed balconies that reduce the appearance of a long contiguous segment of the building walls along Gardena. However, as noted in the staff report, staff believes additional articulation at the street-facing facade is recommended to break up the mass and provide a better overall appearance. Next slide, please. At the ground level of the building along Gardena Avenue is a recessed 7 feet away from the street, and this is from Gardena, and would be layered with landscaping to provide this area with a mix of ground cover shrubs and trees such as Mexican sage, canyon ryegrass, red crepe myrtle to enhance the pedestrian experience from the street. Next slide, please. Overall, the building design is in a modern contemporary style, which will clad a variety of quality finishes, such as with smooth cement plaster, corrugated metal siding, and metal panel siding at corresponding balconies. The windows and doors will be constructed of anodized aluminum material, and frameless glass railings will be used at the top deck. Okay, next slide, please. If the HBC were to approve the project and adopt the resolution certifying the EIR, adopting a statement of overriding considerations for the final EIR, making finding support thereof, and adopting the mitigation monitoring reporting program, staff recommends that conditions of approval be included within the motion, which is presented on the screen, which briefly is: 1, provide greater articulation at the street facades, and 2, prior to building and safety plan check submittal, height and finish details at the perimeter walls, meaning the barrier walls between the adjacent properties, be provided on revised plans for staff's review. And prior to building and safety plan check submittal, locations of the lighting fixtures be provided on the revised plans for staff review and approval. And this just really concludes my brief presentation of the design review. The applicant, as well as their architect, is available to speak on the design as well.
I did have one more question.
Yes, please.
Are there any variances that are being requested as part of the density bonus application?
There is a concession, which is different than the variance, which was a reduction, I believe, of 1 parking space.
Okay. Is that even necessary with the new state
You're
law?
absolutely right, because there's a proximity to Larry's area. They're given a half parking space per, in this case here, is per unit. But they're asking, because the state density bonus law allows them to ask for additional concessions. In this case here, they're just asking for, I think it's a parking space or 2, but I can definitely look at that again. But it's a parking.
That's okay. I just thought there were no longer minimum parking requirements I thought that was a state law that had passed.
I think it's for specifically fully affordable housing projects and things like that. I don't know that it's just any multifamily project. Just from what I've read, I thought it had to do with that.
We could definitely take a look at that, unless it's.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
I'm guessing that they would opt to provide parking, so that's fine. Surprised that's the concession.
May I ask one quick question? Pardon my ignorance on this. The project you just described is the no alternative project. It's the project as proposed. If we were to, if this body were to decide that alternative 2 was a more appropriate and the design, the setup we wanted to go with, let me get that out, sorry. Would we then be brought a different project to review? Because this is not anything like, this doesn't relate to alternative 2 in any way. This doesn't save the house in any way. This scrapes the lot. So I guess I'm confused what the next step in the process would be if we ultimately decided that alternative 2 was our choice.
Sure, and that's why I kind of try to emphasize in the beginning that it's really important to focus on the EIR determination to help guide and get a feel where the rest of the board wants to, talk and discuss and guide where their decision is going to be going. And that's why it's really important to go and discuss the environmental document first.
Yeah.
But this is as proposed and as being requested. And the EIR is, once again, it's an informational document which we're providing, as required by CEQA, all the range of alternatives that are feasible to reduce these significant impacts, or mitigate, or try to avoid. I mean, that's the intention of it, and we've kind of addressed what alternatives are available for your consideration this night. Of course, as mentioned before, and before I concluded the design review portion, the HBC has a wide variety of options. They can even approve as proposed considering that they must have a statement of overriding considerations and provide specific reasons why they are allowing these significant avoidable impacts, and maybe addressing these reasons, whether it's going to be the benefit of why this project is going to help the city achieve its affordability, housing stock, its RENA numbers, or so forth. I mean, this is really, all this information is for the commission to weigh and take into their consideration.
So back to what was hoping was a quick question. If we decide that we want to go with alternative, if this body decides alternative 2, we would be presented a different project at some point for design review, or no?
If the HPC were to select an alternative, that would be the determination. Yes.
Right.
But it would come back to the HPC.
We would have another presentation like you just gave on the project that ultimately would be built, because we don't.
Correct. If you certify the EIR and select alternative 2, and once again, you still have to make a determination of the significant overriding considerations for the noise impacts. So yes, you would be certifying the EIR first.
Mr. Krause, sorry.
Real quick, I didn't introduce myself before. I don't think I'm Eric Krause.
That's okay.
Deputy Director of Community Development. Chair Craignotti. So to answer your question, if the applicant chose to move forward with the project
Yes.
under either alternative 3, that would come back to you.
Okay.
But if that's not the project they ultimately want to propose, then it would definitely.
Obviously, if they didn't want to do a project, there'd be nothing for us to review.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, so any other questions? You have a question, sir?
I just have a couple of quick questions. Number one, what are our choices here this evening? I heard your presentation, so if I understand it correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, one choice is accept the project as prepared, 31 units and so forth. No project. And then 2 alternatives are relocating alternative 1 or alternative 2. So you have 4 choices before us.
Sure. For all this information disclosed to you tonight is for your consideration. Amongst your discussions, if some of these aspects of the EIR are disagreeable, I mean, you can even reject this EIR.
So if we certified the EIR, just said we want to certify the EIR as it is, does that automatically select alternative 2, since that's the one that's being recommended by staff? Or
It's not being
also have
recommended by staff. It's just being identified as being the superior.
Okay.
The HPC can select any of the alternatives, or
So
even
it's two-pronged. We have to certify the EIR and then select whether one of those 4 options he just described. There are 3 options: no
Sure.
project, alternative 2, or alternative 3, or alternative 1, I guess, which would allow the taking down of the resource altogether.
Okay. So your options this evening is to make a decision that the project be returned for redesign, or maybe approve the project with conditions, or may approve the project without conditions as far as design review. But as far as the EIR, you could use any of the alternatives. Also, you could even question and reject the EIR also as well. I mean, there's a wide variety of options here.
That's not helpful. Sorry. We need some very specific, some of us, pardon me, I'm not going to speak for everybody, some of us need some very specific direction. This is one of the first times something as complex as this has come before us. So I just want to make sure we still have a lot of things to get through, but by the time it comes for us to make a decision on what we're doing, it would be helpful if we knew exactly the questions that we were being asked to answer this evening. So, Mr. Krause, thank you.
Just as a point of clarification, so to make any recommendation on any of the alternatives, with the exception of the no project, you'd have to first certify the EIR before you can move forward. That is the driver for any project on the site.
Okay.
If you just say, we don't want to certify the EIR because we want the no project, then you don't have to do anything with the EIR at that point.
Got it. But if we certify the EIR, we then should select.
Of course, yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
You should, because you're going to be providing direction then to the applicant and kind of what direction you want to head on that.
Thank you.
Okay.
And I'm sorry if I may, so again, this is all complicated. So the SOC and the MMRP, are those part of the EIR, or do we also certify those separately and in each case?
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you,
Yeah.
Commissioner Vartanian. You'd have to adopt the statement of overrides as part of the EIR certification.
As part of the
So
EIR?
now, if the one of the other alternatives outside of the project was selected, then the statement of overrides is going to be a little bit different in terms of the findings, because you wouldn't have to make the finding for the demolition of the resource. So I don't,
For the demolition of the, if an alternative is chosen, there's no demolition of the resource.
correct.
Right, if we select alternative 2 or
So
3.
the SOC changes,
So the statement of overriding considerations makes findings, assuming that the demolition of the resource would occur.
What if we rejected the EIR?
Well, you can well, if you end up rejecting the EIR, we would appreciate feedback in terms of where you think the EIR is lacking, so that we can go back and then make modifications to
So
that.
then you
But
would
that's
come back to us again?
correct. So if
If the applicant decided he wanted to do that.
Yeah, if you don't certify the EIR and because you feel it's inadequate, then we would have to go back and make modifications to it.
Okay, and if we approve the EIR, then we have to go with the next steps they were outlining to choose one of the alternatives.
Correct. Or, I mean, you can certify the EIR and then you don't necessarily have to make a choice on an alternative at this moment if there's other information you wanted to see regarding those alternatives.
So if we certify the EIR, we would then recommend conditions or answer further questions, and you would still come back to us?
Yeah, it kind of gets to this whole concept of a return for redesign at that point. So even if you certify the EIR and say, or the commission really like to see alternative 2 or 3 on there, then we'd have to bring that alternative back, because as you can see, we don't have plans drawn out for that yet. And so if the applicant chooses to move forward with that, we'd come back to you with a new set of design review application to take a look at.
Okay.
Thank you.
At this point, if we don't have any other questions, I'd like to open the public hearing.
I have a few more questions on the design while we're still doing that, if that's possible.
Maybe we should do these first, if you don't mind, and because maybe they'll get answered
Okay,
by some
that's
of the
fine.
speakers. Is that all right?
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, so I'd like to start with Josh Christensen.
They've been waiting.
How are we doing today, Commissioners? My name is Joshua Christensen, live in the Peliconey District here in Glendale. I'm also a member of the Southwest Mountain States Regional Council of Carpenters. We believe this will impact our workers and the workforce here in Glendale. And we say that because the city should require a project that should be built with contractors who will hire locally, who will pay prevailing wages, who utilize apprentices from the state-approved apprenticeship. Workforce requirements reduces construction-related environmental impacts while benefiting the local economy and workforce development. In the recent 2020 report titles, Putting Californians on the High Road Jobs and Climate Act, in 2020-30, the California Workforce Development Board concluded that investment in growth, diversifying and upskill California workforce can positively affect returns on climate mitigation of efforts. Just recently, the South Coast Air Quality Management District found that local hire requirements can reduce in air pollution reductions. Recently, the state of California reacted its commitment towards encouraging workforce development and housing affordability through the Affordable Housing and High Road Jobs Act of 2022, otherwise known as Assembly Bill 2011, which requires projects to pay workers prevailing wage hire from a state-certified apprenticeship programs and projects meeting certain sitting and affordability and development standards. Along with residential projects like this across the state, there's a study that was done in Cal Berkeley in 2021. Sorry, how much time do I got?
You're good.
I got it? Okay, so, sorry. So a study that was done in Cal Berkeley in 2021, it talked about construction burdens on the taxpayers. In residential construction, probably 99% of the workforce is not represented or non-union. In the commercial aspects of construction, the workforce about 99% union and represented and receive a fair wage. In the residential aspects, How is that a burden on the taxpayer? Is because a lot of those folks do not have a livable wage, are paid under the table, are paid in cash because of their citizen status, which is not right. It's illegal to not report taxes on those payrolls. So they're able to take cash. We find this a lot in the residential, and unfortunately, we find it a lot here in Glendale. Contractors have been fined here in Glendale alone. I remember the Nexon Lex project, which was right here in downtown Glendale. The contract subcontractor was fined $6 million for misclassification of their workforce, and so it's a serious issue that we have. We are asking that only if this project gets approved, that they would use and guarantee local hire, folks that are in an apprenticeship, folks that will be able to get paid a fair wage. I've always dreamed to work next to my house. I've always had to go to downtown for a good paying job, like most others, or I had to go to LAX where where government funds are at because it triggers prevailing wage. We all know how expensive the housing is around Southern California, and it'd be nice to be able to build something and actually afford to live in it. We know that there's affordable projects out there that for affordable housing, but what's affordable these days? But I'm always here for any questions. I'm here for the applicant if they have any questions. I live here in Glendale. I've been in this room many, many times. I take pride in the city that I live in, and I'm always here for anything that the city needs. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Christensen.
Mr. Chair, if you mind me to interject.
Yes.
We do have the applicant present. I know we're taking things out of order. I just still want to say that they may have a presentation, or they may want to weigh in. I know we've been discussing a whole lot of things, and we are all moving in all these different directions, but I do kind of kindly remind that they're here to speak.
So the applicant is not specifically one of these cards. The applicant would not have a card, right? They would be someone who's...
They would. I will have them submit a card.
There's a card. Okay. Rodney Kahn, are you the applicant? I am. Great.
Do you mind going to the site context slide of your presentation?
Sure, Casey.
The site context. Oh, yeah. I'll go ahead and start. Good evening, Chairman and Commissioners and City staff. My name is Rodney Kahn. My offices are located here in the city of Glendale. Before I start my presentation, I too find this very confusing. And going through the different alternatives, which I'll speak to later, I found those very confusing as well. So some of the questions that you're asking, we're asking ourselves. But to begin my presentation, our site is located directly across the street, as pointed out, from the Larry Zarian Transportation Center. And this is the transit hub of Glendale. So heavy rail, light rail, MTA buses, the B line, everything is there. Our site is also zoned SFMU, and that's for high density transit oriented housing, which is what we're developing. When the zoning on this property changed, it was looking at putting housing, high density housing, right near transit, which makes all the sense in the world. Also important, we included is in our project, new, affordable, very low income housing. And as we know from the RHNA numbers, we also know that we are significantly deficient in all levels of housing here in the city by a large number. We reviewed the staff report, and I'll speak to you very directly on the alternatives. The alternatives were confusing. We would not agree to any of them. That would make no sense to us whatsoever. For our project, what we're looking at, and it was asked, Chairman, What is the direction? Tell us exactly. I'll tell you exactly what's feasible for us, because it doesn't make sense for us to go down a path that's not feasible. Our proposal is the project that you're reviewing here today. There's not an alternative 1, 2, or 3 that we're looking at. So if this 31-unit project is not feasible, we're not looking at a different alternative. From our perspective, we considered different approaches. None of those work that are being proposed. The economic sense for the project, and once again, it's talked about what's feasible and what's not feasible. If it's not feasible to us, then it doesn't make sense for us to agree to something, whatever alternative is, for you to deliberate on. So from our perspective, we either ask you if you would look at our project here this evening as the 31 unit with the certification of the EIR and the overriding considerations, or not, and then allow us to move forward.
Okay. May I ask a question?
Sure.
When did you take title to this property?
2019.
2019? 18, 19?
19.
Okay. At that time, and maybe we could, are you one of the speakers by chance with a card? Okay.
He's the property owner.
Okay, I do have some questions for the property owner. If it's possible, do you mind coming to the podium, sir? Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm the owner of the property.
Great. Do you mind just stating your name?
Suren Tutunja.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So my first question was when you took title to the property, and you said it was 2018? 19, sorry. At the time that you purchased the property, was it disclosed to you by the seller or through your own research that the house had a 5S3 historic designation on it?
Yes.
So when you purchased the property, you did know that there was a potential historic resource on the property? Right. Okay. Thank you. That's all I needed to know. That's all I needed to know, yes. Thank you. You're good?
I'm good, unless you guys have questions.
Yeah, I have a question for Mr. Khan.
Sure.
You mentioned that we're deficient in low-income housing in Glendale. Of the 31 units in your proposed project, how many would be low income?
3 of them would be very low income.
3 would be very low. Is there any other designation besides very low?
Sure. There's low, there's moderate, there's very low, there's extreme low.
You're only doing the very low?
I'm doing the very low, and in this city, that's the lowest, very low.
So the balance of the units would be market rate?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Aram, and I'm sorry, I can't read the writing very well. I apologize, but I will ask you to state your name.
Yeah. I am Aram Alachegian.
Alachegian.
I'm
Thank
the
you very much.
project architect. The address is 320 Arden Avenue, Glendale, California. We've been in Glendale for 38 years doing projects down here. Yeah. I'm here for the design. Obviously, you folks didn't spend much time on it. But as I concur with what was stated here by Rodney Khan, we are here for the alternative with the 31 units. It's much needed housing and a transit zone. It's right across from the station, and it's abutting to industrial uses in the back. So we think this will help the community, especially with the low incomes. First floor is, the 3 units could be used as a live workplace. They have doors opening towards the street, so we're making it pedestrian friendly. We're providing a bike racks for the project. One level of subterranean, and we're having additional amenities for the building itself. It would be a gym located, a community room, and additional storages and a rooftop deck, which we will be enjoying. The homeowners or the rentals would be actively involved, communicating up there or enjoying the evenings. So that's basically the description of the project, and I'm here if you have any questions, I'll be answering to that.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions for the architect? Thank you.
Thank you.
Last card, Levik Tarvadirian. Thank you. If you don't mind stating your name for us, please.
Yes, my name is Levik Tarvadirian, and I own the property on 1638 South Central, just next door to the project. I have owned my property for the past 23 years, and I have lived in the city of Glendale for the past 40 years. And I have had my business there for a long time. And my concern was the amount of parking that they're trying to provide for 31 units that they're building right next to my shop. And since the beginning that I've moved there since 1999, the parking spaces outside was very hard to find, scarce. And it hasn't gotten any better since they built a brand new building on San Fernando Road and Central. It would be on the northwest corner. That took almost 5 years to complete. And that has had a major impact on the parking outside. So I do not know how they want to provide only 16 parking spaces for 31 units. I'm just here to tell you what I think, and I just don't think it makes sense.
Thank you very much. Parking is a very sensitive issue, unfortunately. The state of California is really making it difficult for local governments to enforce parking regulations.
Yes,
We feel I hear your pain, and I feel it.
Yes, and I'm hoping that you would consider those into making your decisions. And as I said, I have lived in Glendale for the past 40 years, and I do own 3 properties in Glendale, and I'm a proud person living in this city, and I really love living here for the past 40 years, and I just hope that you would do the right thing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, quick clarification. Did I hear you say that you own a commercial business that's adjacent or a residential?
Yes, just right next to it is called Peak Auto Body.
Okay.
Yes, which I have owned. I have owned this business for the past 38 years that I've lived in Glendale, and I have leased that out for the past 4 years, and kind of semi-retired.
Good. Yes. Good for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
We envy you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Casey, do we have any calls?
We do have one caller.
Okay, let's take them. Caller, you're on the air.
Hi, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's Francesca Smith calling. If I could have an extra minute, I would appreciate it. May I ask that?
Sure.
Thank you so much. As you know, I'm a qualified architectural historian with more than 3 decades of successful experience. Tonight, I'm speaking on behalf of Glendale Now and Then, which is a newly established organization, but I'll also be referencing information previously provided by the Glendale Historical Society and my own work. I'm going to move ahead and skip some of the things. Mr. Krause and Ms. Van Meiden, who I could hardly hear, are wildly incorrect and seem to have confused the issues deliberately. The applicant funnily calls the alternatives confusing when he does this for a living. Perhaps he doesn't understand CEQA or this project, but his project goals are not so stated in the document. I submit that his are purely for profit. No financials were submitted to demonstrate that only the proposed project is feasible, so that point really doesn't matter. As you know, public agencies should not approve projects if there are feasible alternatives or feasible mitigation measures that would substantially lessen the significant environmental impact. And those alternatives were only explored because they are feasible. I can skip ahead. Those alternatives would not have been covered if they weren't feasible. You do not need to certify the EIR. The maximum density allowable and financial profit were never stated project goals. If you all feel uncomfortable with this or don't understand what your commission is being asked to vote on, you should probably abstain. I've done it before. A different location for the project or relocation of the historic buildings elsewhere could also be possible. While they may also cause CEQA impacts, they need not be in the boundaries of long gone Tropico. The test in CEQA is whether or not the project proponent can reasonably acquire, control, or otherwise have access to an alternative site, or the site is already owned by the proponent. They need not already own that property. I will skip the period of significance, which has been established in TGHS's letters. This is not being evaluated as three separate buildings with different historic context located on one property, as described tonight by Mr. Joe. I'm moving ahead. The project consultant corroborated on a 10-year period of significance and established a second qualified professional judgment that substantiated a decade for the period of significance. Recently, the court asserted that Glendale misrepresented another legal case to suggest that a lead agency can freely and outright reject an expert's opinion. In that decision, the court noted that my opinion in the other case was amply supported by facts. So I'm skipping ahead. An alternative that would have avoided demolition is, I think, alternative 3. It's hard to tell which it is, a smaller or reduced project, and consideration of rehabilitation of the contributing buildings, which are more than one on the site in accordance with the standards. Courts have previously overturned numerous EIRs due to improper or incomplete analysis of alternatives. I'm going to ahead. An off-site alternative is feasible. The primary objective of this project is not modification of an existing facility. That would be California Native Plant Society versus City of Santa Cruz. I'm skipping ahead to what the project applicant's objectives are, which are stated in the draft EIR. And it is, the first one is contributing to the health of the city, blah, 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 environmentally, economically viable infill project that would provide an increase in residential units. If the buildings that are there now were reused, it would add units to the city's roster of units. The garage could be reused as another unit. The main house is currently a duplex. If number 2 is to construct a new multifamily residential building with new architectural designs and efficient building systems that promote energy conservation, reusing the buildings there would achieve that. What is greener than reusing historic buildings? Number 3 is to provide new residential opportunities that offer multimodal opportunities. A resident, if the units were rehabilitated, could use combinations of vehicles, take a bus, take a rideshare service, walk, ride a bike, take a train whenever they choose. Multimodal means any combination of those methods. Bike racks don't make the project multimodal. It's walkable now. Enhancing the general welfare of the public by offering affordable housing opportunities, which is number 4. Those could be affordable housing units now. More could be built behind, things could be added on to. None of that was looked at. And number 5 is to develop new residential opportunities close to the existing retail amenities. Reuse of the subject property would absolutely create new residential opportunities that are close to the existing retail amenities. So just to remind you, you need not certify the EIR. If you reject it because it's flawed and would demolish a historic property where there are feasible alternatives that would avoid substantial adverse change to the historical resource, you'd be doing what the Historic Preservation Commission is tasked with. I appreciate your time. I'm available for questions if you have any, but I'll probably just get hung up on.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Anyone have questions for Ms. Smith? No. Thank you for your time.
We do have one more caller, actually. Just called
Okay.
in. Alexander?
Yes, hi. I decided to call in on this topic because, unfortunately, I missed most of the presentation about the actual aspect of the building itself, and certainly I walked past it. It is a cute building, and, occasionally see it go, but the reality is that the siting of the building is of such high land value. It's across from Glendale train station. You can get to downtown in 10 to 15 minutes with a single stop. You can go to Santa Barbara in a couple hours. You can connect to buses that go across the state and the country. That area is ripe for development. That's the right place to put units. So when a developer wants to come in and put, 30 units of units, hopefully it'll be tastefully done. Hopefully it'll be a nice place to live. That's the kind of thing that the city really ought to support. Now, I won't speak for the Historic Preservation Commission, which should abide by, its mission and judge the project accordingly and provide that advice to City Council. But I think this is really a clear-cut case of the extremely high value this can provide to the city, to the people who live in the city, to have access to just a fantastic train station that is only going to have better service as time goes on. Metrolink frequencies are constantly going up. Service is getting better, connectivity is getting better, and this area is really the right place to do it. So I would hate to see this forestalled. And frankly, it does help that while the building is nice, it is cute, it has some good architectural features and history, it's not outstanding. I mean, there's much better examples in the city. So in that situation, I really wouldn't be too sad to see it go, unfortunately, but the value far outweighs it. So thank you for taking my call. Good luck making your decision. Bye-bye.
Excuse me 1 second. Before you hang up, do you mind stating your name for the record, please?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, my name is Alexander.
Your last name, please?
Oh, Alexander Yassayan.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Any other calls? Okay. Then I will close the public hearing. And we have no more presentations from staff, correct? You guys are done? Thank you.
Can we take a break?
Yes, that was my next thing. 3 minutes, please. 3-minute recess.
5?
5-minute recess.
Thanks.
And we're back. Thank you. All right, we've heard from staff, we've heard from the public. It's time for commissioner comments or questions, I suppose.
I have a lot more questions.
A lot more questions.
Yeah, I'm sorry. And they're fairly technical. I mean, I know that as the Historic Preservation Commission, our obligation is primarily to think about the historic resource impacts, but we are also the body responsible for certifying the EIR, and stating its sufficiency regarding noise and vibration. And so I just want to understand the mitigation and the analysis a little bit better. Okay.
May I interject and ask a question on top of that?
Maybe before we start getting too far in the weeds.
So I think I heard from the applicant that if we do not, if this body chooses not to approve the project and select an alternative, that is not a consideration for, the project applicant at all and the owners. So I'm, before we get into the EIR, because I'm going to assume that if the commission is not inclined to allow demolition of the historic resource, and I'm not sure, I'm guessing I know which way my colleagues would lean, then do we just not go any further? Is there any point in, do we need to do anything with an EIR?
Hi, Jillian.
Good evening. I'm hopefully going to provide the clarification on the next steps, the
Thank you.
steps forward that you're looking for. So here we are. This is the initial design. And the initial design, the Design Review Board, Design Review Authority's initial design jurisdiction is as follows. Make a decision that the project be returned for redesign, or approve the project with conditions or without conditions. That's it. There's no denial of the project. So it is built into the way the code is structured to provide that direction.
Okay, with respect to the design. Okay.
On the design, now, connecting in the CEQA approval, because the Historic Preservation Commission took over the responsibility for design and as well needing, if there's an approval, to complete the CEQA review. So that obligation is to make environmental determinations under the California Environmental Quality Act on any discretionary project applications, of which design review is a discretionary application. The Historic Preservation Commission considers for approval. So since the options here are approval of the project, or redesign. So approval with conditions, approval without conditions, or redesign, or send it back for redesign. Those are your options on the design review.
Yes.
If you decide to approve it with or without conditions, then you need to consider the certification of the environmental impact report. If you don't, and you can provide direction as well, if you don't certify the environmental impact report with an approval, with conditions or without conditions, then the project essentially cannot go any further at this point in time, other than back to redesign.
Yeah.
Right? Does that make sense?
I think so.
Okay.
Just
one more question.
repeating that again, except with conditions,
Yeah, so you have three options. You can send it back for redesign.
redesign.
You can approve the project with conditions, but a prerequisite to that would be the certification of your environmental document. Or you can approve the project as proposed without conditions. But again, a prerequisite to that approval is a certification of the environmental impact.
So what is the difference between accept with conditions and redesign? Wouldn't the conditions be submitting a redesign? Are they one and the same?
Not necessarily. You could send it back for redesign, something more comprehensive, or you can approve it with conditions where you are looking at certain features of the project as proposed. This is the proposed project. Maybe there's a design component in the way the facade is laid out, or the undulations within that facade, design features that you're conditioning to improve the aesthetics of the building, for example.
So could one of our conditions possibly be to accept the property and not change or alter the existing historical property?
Historical resource on it?
The other historical resource on it?
No, because that,
Well, I mean, the
that would be a return for redesign.
I think Commissioner Yurka raises, sort of the questions that is begged by that, which is how do you evaluate that design because you haven't seen what that redesign would look like if it were alternative 1 or alternative 2 or alternative 3, so the relocation of the building or the retention of the building.
So with the conditions, you're talking about the existing building?
Yes, it's the existing project.
And there's no rejection available?
Unfortunately, the way this is written right now, this is something we'll be taking a closer look at because we are also needing to consider all of these, all the state legislation that has streamlining requirements, and we want to ensure that projects that come forward aren't going back repeatedly for, there's a limitation on the number of times they can be reviewed. So we want to ensure that we can streamline the process, for lack of a better word, shorten that process, the stops along the way in compliance with state law. So we are looking at this, unfortunately, and we as staff went into a lot of conversation, discussion about what are the options that the Design Review Board authority here, the HPC has. And this is on the initial review, which is what you have just those 3 options: return for redesign, approve with conditions, or approve without conditions. Any of the approvals require the certification of an environmental document first.
Thank you.
And hopefully that's as clear as mud.
Nick, I did want to clarify one thing. So if it's approved with conditions, that means it's staff level. They deal with the project. Return for redesign means it comes back to us.
Correct.
Yeah.
I got that part.
Okay, but I'm sorry, I'm still a little confused. So I understand we have a project, we can review the project and, redesign, make recommendations. But if we are not in favor of the project, where do the alternatives come in? Is that a return for redesign for alternatives? I'm confused about that.
The alternatives outlined in the EIR.
Yes, there could. Those are the alternatives that were. So we have the environmental review, which has legal prerequisites and requirements for what's necessary to look at. So it could be alternative 2 with a relocated building. You could send it back for redesign to reflect a design that was evaluated as an alternative 2 or some iteration thereof. And as was part of the conversation before, and a question that came from Commissioner Yurka is, well, how many units will it be and what will that look like? Under CEQA, we need to take a look at sort of the worst case scenario. So what would be the largest conceivable development envelope on the property, which is what Mr. Joe was referring to if in those alternatives. So that would be sort of that worst case environmental impact scenario from the alternative. What it'll exactly look at like and how many units it will have will indeed probably be somewhat less to accommodate all the other features of a building that are necessary for it to function.
Okay. So do we first need, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I know you have a lot of questions about the EIR, I believe.
Yeah, I think we need to give feedback on the EIR, whatever happens subsequently regarding the project. I mean, I do think that even if, you are sensing the temperature of the room, which is that as a Historic Preservation Commission, we are not enthusiastic about allowing demolition. And there's maybe a question between alternative 2 and alternative 3. But I think that we need to consider the EIR as proposed for the project, just because this is our chance to give feedback and get information.
So if we send the project back for redesign with the condition or requirement that as a hypothetical,
you can give comment and
say
direction.
that the resource that the house 1640 be moved similar to what is recommended in alternative 2 of the EIR. We don't have to make any comment about the EIR in that one, right? Because we're rejecting the project or sending it back for redesign. You said the only time we have to approve.
You can, but the certification process occurs when you have an approval in front
Right.
of you.
Since we're not approving it,
and you're
it would
not.
come before us again.
Again,
The
that's
EIR would
correct.
come before us again.
And you would see this, modified design, and then you'd be considering that within the context of what was evaluated in the EIR. But right now, the EIR has evaluated the project and alternatives that were selected, as we've discussed, in order to lessen or eliminate identified significant environmental impacts of the project. Whether it ends up being that exact iteration or some iteration that is smaller than the proposed project, that would have to be evaluated not only in the design,
Right.
but you could take a look at that within the context of what was analyzed in the EIR. Sometimes there are minor technical changes within that can be a subsequent look under CEQA permits that. You do a minor technical change to your environmental document. It's no worse impact. No recirculation or
Got it.
additional environmental review is necessarily triggered. It's just identifying if there's some minor technical changes. So those things can be accommodated from a CEQA perspective within the process of the design review.
So if we were, I would like us to vet the EIR, but my fellow council members may feel differently. If we were, instead of making a decision to certify or not certify the EIR and just to kick the can down the road, but were to give directions about a preferred alternative, can the applicant appeal that to council?
That is a really good question, and then we looked at that as well. Right now, the way in the design review section, which 3047 of the Glendale Municipal Code, it says, after approval with conditions or denial of the final design of review application, the applicant or an aggrieved party can, including any city official, may appeal the design review decision. So sending back for redesign is not an approval.
Okay.
So it's
At this stage, they may not be able to.
At this stage.
They may not be able to.
However, if you did approve it tonight with conditions and certified the EIR, that would be an appealable decision as qualified under 3047-100 appeals for design review.
Got it.
So the applicant would have no choice if they wanted to move forward to come back to this body.
That's correct.
Okay.
No choice but to come back,
To
right?
come back with a redesign.
Okay.
Meaning they couldn't bypass us and go to council.
If we sent
at
it
this
back for
point,
redesign.
yeah.
Okay, I'd like to reopen the public hearing for a moment.
Thanks, yes.
Mr. Khan?
May I add, just to
Yes.
on the first page of the staff report, we did suggest 7 motions that you can select from, and number 7 was an alternative motion providing direction to staff to be specified for HPC. So, I mean, just a reminder, there are some selections there you can take in consideration as well. I know this is very confusing, and
It won't
I
be
thought just-
forever, but this is one of our first times. So thank you. Mr. Khan?
Thank you very much. I just want to make it clear, because I don't want you guys to waste any of your time if you don't need to, and same with us. So I just want to make it clear, from a design, there's the environmental and design. So I'm going to start with design first. The design, the way I'm understanding it, is the only options you have are return for redesign, approve, or approve with condition. And from our perspective, if you're not wanting to or willing to approve the 31-unit project that we're proposing, then by all means, please return for redesign.
Got it.
Just so you know, when we come back, I don't want to give any misleading information or ideas. You will be seeing the exact same project. We are not going to redesign it. It's going to be 31 units. That's the project we'd like to move forward with, and that's what we'd like to do.
Okay.
So I don't, in terms of the design piece of it, that's where we're at. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I'm just saying, I just want you guys to know that.
Thank you.
So going in.
Thank you.
The environmental piece, I'm looking at, there's 7 different options. To me, based on what I've heard, the most logical to me is the motion to not certify the final EIR, deny the requested demolition associated with the proposed project. That's very clear. There's no mixing words. I don't think you'd need to overanalyze it. I'm not telling you what to do. You do whatever you want to do. I'm suggesting the fact that where we're coming from is to say, we'd like to move forward with this 31-unit project. If we're required to come back here 3 times, we'll come back here 3 times, but we're not going to change the project.
Got it. Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you.
I'm closing the public hearing. Okay. Any comments?
I still have questions, and I'm going to
go for
ask
it.
them. I will not ask them to the degree that I was going to before. Ms. Van Meiden? So if we were to not certify, to vote to not certify the EIR, is that just that decision appealable to City Council?
Based on what I had read to you before, to make it, and this is, you are acting on, to make environmental determinations under the Environmental Quality Act on any discretionary project that comes to the Historic Preservation for approval. So since you don't have an action here, you can say that you're not going to certify it. And so it creates a conundrum because your options are either to approve it or to return it for redesign. And since there is no approval here, you can adopt the motion not to certify the EIR.
And deny the demolition.
Not associated with approval, however.
So we would still have to say something about the project design itself.
Well, you should.
You
have to select one of the 3 options that are in front of you.
So if we went along with what the applicant suggested, which was denying the demolition permit and not certifying the EIR, is that all we would be doing tonight, or we also need to make some kind of a decision about the design itself?
Well, the decision would be of the 3 options, right? Which is you cannot make a final approval at this point in time. So there is no approval in front of you. It is other than approval of the project with or without conditions.
Right.
So it would go back for redesign. It would come back exactly as proposed with its environmental impact report. And at that point, you have the jurisdiction and the authority under the code to approve or deny the project as final design. This is initial design. Sort of like in the downtown specific plan area and the former redevelopment project areas, we had stages 1, 2, and 3. They would come forward as a conceptual design with no CEQA associated with it to get feedback on the design so that the developer could move forward and flesh that out and based on a stabilized project description, prepare the environmental document.
I would just say that, because I would not want to vote not to certify the EIR in the absence of my pages of questions.
Okay.
So
then let's get to them.
Okay, well, but we don't have to do that. I mean, that's all I'm saying.
That's correct.
Is
You
we
do not have to do it.
vote to certify or not certify the EIR tonight. We could give direction about the project we would like to see, which would include retention of the resource. And Mr. Khan has made clear that they're going to bring the same project back. I don't think that that should change what we direct.
Well, I mean, if we're going to ultimately be asking these questions, if your questions are ultimately going to need to be asked,
They could be asked later.
I would be happy to have them asked now.
All right. Okay, can I have whoever prepared the EIR come up? Thanks. Okay.
Sorry, really quick. Do you mind stating your name?
Sorry.
Yes, Ian Todd, SWCA.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so I have a question about consistency between the MMRP and mitigation that's mentioned in the recirculated DEIR and the draft EIR. There was a periodic inspection mitigation that was dropped from this. We have a separate document that's 6 pages. That's
MMRP?
just yeah. Why is that not in there?
Yeah, I'd have to look. I don't know if I've seen the latest MMRP version, but all the mitigation that's from the draft EIR, the supplemental, should be in the MMRP. So that could
be a mistake.
Could be a mistake.
Okay, so that would need to be fixed, I think. Also, there was, so in the draft EIR, there's a mitigation measure that is, sorry. Oh, here it is. Heavy equipment similar to that of bulldozers shall not be used within 5 feet of any existing neighboring structures.
Mhm.
That's also gone.
Okay, that must be an oversight as well, because yeah, like I mentioned, any mitigation that's in the draft or the supplemental EIR should be in the MMRP.
Okay, so I think at the very least, we would need to see an updated MMRP that includes these elements. Oh, do you have?
I will just add to that. My name is Carl Lawrence Wright, SWCA. The mitigation measures that were in the recirculated document are consistent with the recirculated noise report, which was prepared in 2022. So the mitigation measures are from the recirculated document, not the draft EIR.
Okay, so
the changes that you're seeing, the draft EIR mitigation measures may have been slightly altered based on the updated noise report.
Okay, but given that we have the identification of a building that's really close.
Yes.
And could suffer much greater vibration impacts, I'm just curious why you would have gotten rid of heavy equipment similar to that of bulldozers shall not be used within 5 feet of any existing neighborhood structures. That
in the mitigation measure?
Yes. That it seems more urgent now that there is a building 3 feet from the property line.
I would have to look at the mitigation measure. I think it may have just been the analysis that they redid, the acoustical consultant. That's certainly something that you can add back into the mitigation measure.
Okay.
Yeah, as a condition. I mean, I guess we should note too that there was a technical consultant that prepared the noise study, so we aren't noise experts.
Okay. The other question, and this is more of a general question, is that the language that's used in the MMRP has a lot of qualification, so that it discusses construction, haul, truck, and materials. Construction, haul, truck, and materials delivery traffic shall avoid residential areas whenever feasible. The construction contractor shall place noise and vibration generating construction equipment and locate construction staging areas away from sensitive uses whenever feasible. The construction contractor shall use on-site electrical sources to power equipment rather than diesel generators where feasible. Mitigation measures are supposed to be specific and enforceable and have clear performance standards. I don't know what feasible means, how that's measured. I don't see how these meet the requirements for enforceable specific mitigation measures. And the same is true for the vibration impacts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think it just gives, flexibility, during construction.
No, no, I think that's a concern. I mean, they can have like a certain flexibility, but the point is to reduce the impacts as much as possible.
Sorry, go ahead.
No,
that's correct. I think in the case of electrical outlets or alternative routes, we cannot specify the preferred route of trucking to that level of specificity. Part of it will be when construction is underway, the city building department that is going to be the compliance manager of these mitigation measures. I think it's when feasible as determined by any sort of monitoring plan that the city comes up with. So you're correct that when feasible is not ideal, but some of these measures you cannot have that degree of specificity without discussing with the building and safety department.
But could that not be done ahead of time? Could that not be done now?
I would defer to the city on that one.
Well,
the haul routes and construction staging, because this would overflow into public right-of-ways, it's going to be reviewed by the city engineer. And depending on the scope of work, I mean, this thing is going to be so variable right now that we're even talking about a proposed project with 31 units, even analyzing a reduced project, a significantly reduced project to 15 to 11 units. I mean, these all things require different things. And as you could condition it, it can mean different things. I mean, you know, it's almost a standard practice for our building and safety and public works engineering to use the maximum feasible, because we don't know what the project is going to be ultimately be, because we're even talking about reducing the project or changing it or whatnot. I mean, we can ask them for the closest approximate, but it's kind of like this thing kind of can change.
I think it's been established that the impacts of noise and vibration are, what are the terms we use?
Significant and unavoidable.
And unavoidable. So it seems like in any situation, whether it's 31 or 15 or 11, they're still significant and unavoidable. So it seems to me that a plan, you know, for mitigation could be prepared ahead of time, since those are going to remain significant and unavoidable in any instance.
There's no route that they would become less than significant. These are the mitigation measures to the maximum extent feasible that they could determine with the schematic design documents. But one of the alternatives might reduce the construction noise and vibration, but it would not reduce it to a less than significant level, even with the mitigation measures in place.
Right, and so I guess, I mean, even with truck routes or whatever it might be, we're talking about a pretty small location. I mean, I guess that could be, it seems it should be able to be established with a plan.
I haven't,
But,
Eric, did
you know, I
wanna-
don't mean to interrupt your.
No, that's
Mr.
okay.
Krause?
That's the only way you'll get a word in edgewise.
Sorry?
That's the only way you'll get a word in edgewise.
Commissioner Yurka, members of the commission. So in terms of when we're using terms feasibility into these mitigation measures, we're not experts in terms of what technology is available to further reduce some of the measures. So I don't know what kind of equipment specifically that a contractor might use that may or may not be available electric. So that's why you're talking about don't use diesel generators if you don't have to. But if there's not a tool that is available in a different format, then they would be allowed to use that tool. That's kind of where the whole measure of feasibility goes. So they're going to be required to use every tool that's available that's not diesel, but that may not be the case in terms of the construction techniques they're using. Regarding the haul routes, there's parameters that Public Works looks at in terms of, you know, street widths, right-of-ways, because you have to maintain access for both public safety and pedestrians for vehicles to continue to move. So a lot of those haul routes have to be established with a valid, like a licensed contractor, to be able to make sure that they can provide that service within the context of what Public Works looks for to maintain our circulation patterns, so we have safety and stuff still available. So that's essentially why the term feasibility is used in both of those mitigation measures.
But that couldn't be determined beforehand?
Well, it's...
What routes would they be able to use for construction?
Well, it depends on when the construction is going to happen, because depending on where that haul route is moving the dirt or any other debris to, that might change depending on circumstances. As you know, that our landfill is not exactly, you know, it's almost full. So if they might be able to use that, or they might have to go to another landfill to dispose of this thing. So that has to be kind of established before they can absolutely outline their haul routes.
Okay.
May I ask a question? Mr. Krause, I trust you've reviewed many of these types of documents that we're reviewing. The language that Commissioner Yurka is concerned about, is this unusual to be in a document like this, that specific language, or is that pretty common practice for that type of language?
It is common practice for mitigation measures that can't fully mitigate an impact. If you have a mitigation measure that's going to fully mitigate it, then you wouldn't go to if feasible or anything else, because you have concrete information to say that these mitigation measures absolutely reduce that impact to less than significant. So when you have an impact that's not fully mitigated, you want them to mitigate it as much as humanly possible. And that's why the term feasibility is in there, because we can't say you have to use this tool and then that tool is not even available on the market. So then they wouldn't be able to, construct the project in terms of how that's, I mean, I'm not a construction expert, but that's why that term feasibility is typically used in these mitigation measures.
So, I mean, it's a recent case, but Sierra Watch versus the County of Placer had noise mitigation that was offered mitigation where feasible, and that language was found impermissibly vague, precisely because there's no definition of feasibility. So you don't really know. So if it's not feasible to avoid residential areas with the trucks, if it's not feasible to place noise and vibration generating construction equipment away from sensitive uses, if it's not feasible to use electrical sources versus diesel generators, then 3 of these mitigation measures are meaningless.
No, I understand that, but when they bring the construction project to building and safety and public works, as Dennis was explaining, they're going to be so like on a haul route, there's conditions that you have to meet, and so those conditions are going to be applied to any haul route or anything else in terms of how that has to occur. And if they can do it electric, we're going to make them do it electric. We're not going to just ignore the fact that there's mitigation measures on these projects. So
yeah,
I'm not familiar with the particular case law you're mentioning, but I don't know if that was to fully mitigate an impact or not. So yeah.
It was an EIR, and it was also it's significant and unavoidable. But you raise another issue that I have, which is, and I wrote a page number, but not a document, but there's a quote that enforceable measures, in parentheses, actions, to reduce construction noise and vibration that the City Department of Building and Safety would verify prior to issuance of demolition permits. And that sounds to me like deferred mitigation. Like those specific enforceable measures are going to come prior to issuance of demolition permits, but they have to be part of the EIR in order for us to certify it. Does that make sense?
No, I know what you're referring to. Yeah, so it's not deferred in that these are measures that, like on a building code, when you're talking about construction of a building, like for interior noise, it has to be at 45. That's in the building code. They have to meet that somehow. Similar to that, there's demolition techniques that are done by the demolition contractors. And then basically when projects are being evaluated by building and safety, there's specific measures that they're going to have to apply to based on building codes and everything else, noise attenuation, that sort of thing. So that gets evaluated during the permitting process because they won't get the permit unless they meet those conditions.
If I may chime in,
Yeah.
Commissioner Yurka, I'm reading the mitigation measures under construction noise vibration control. This is mitigation number 2.
Is this the MMRP?
This is the MMRP. I just downloaded it from the website. It's probably the last page.
Okay.
And it specifically states that to ensure construction vibration levels do not exceed the established standard, an acoustical consultant shall monitor vibration levels at each affected building and/or structure on the adjacent properties when heavy construction occurs in close proximity. Based on direction of the acoustical consultant, vibratory construction activities that generate vibration levels in excess of standards shall be prohibited. I think this is the way that they're trying to find those thresholds that someone monitors it on site and try to. And I know there are words to the extent feasible, because they're going to say these things that we're going to prohibit it, we're going to stop it. And even it says for alternative construction equipment, to the extent feasible, the construction contractor shall use alternative construction techniques or equipment such as hand excavation to avoid or reduce unnecessary construction vibration.
Right, to the extent feasible. I mean, even the one you read, vibration monitoring, okay, that's a sub measure from prepare a monitoring plan. The one below it, alternative construction techniques. Should construction vibration levels be observed in excess of the established standard, the contractor shall halt construction and put alternative construction techniques into practice to the extent feasible. What if it's not feasible? And then, I don't see how you can claim as it was being claimed, sorry, my notes are all over the place.
But to the last sentence here, it does say that to ensure vibration levels at each affected building and or structure on adjacent properties are not exceeded.
Sorry,
It's the last sentence of alternative construction techniques. I mean,
right, following incorporation of the alternative construction techniques, which we have just read, will be put into practice to the extent feasible, right? If it's not feasible, then I don't see how those alternative construction techniques are going to ensure vibration levels meet a certain standard.
I know that when we talk about the feasible, it is talking about the extent of the available technology, and I understand your concern, but these mitigation monitorings are there is to ensure it does not exceed. I do understand your concern here, Commissioner Yurka.
Commissioner Yurka, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. So that's kind of why we led to the conclusion that this is a significant unavoidable impact, because there is no mitigation measure that would absolutely reduce the measure, because we don't know that the technology is available. So that's why it's left as significant and unavoidable. And mind you, when we're doing evaluations in EIRs, we're looking at worst case scenarios. So if you take a construction time, they're not going to be sitting there pounding on the fence for the entire 4 months of things under construction. It's going to be for a limited time for a particular portion of that project. But the EIR is looking at kind of overall worst case. And that's why in this particular issue, because of the proximity to the residents next door, we've left it as unavoidable, that we can't mitigate it.
No, I understand that, but it's also the mitigation measures are, granted that it's significant and unavoidable, are still supposed to mitigate.
Of course, yeah, to the extent feasible. So.
Well, but this is the exact same case as Sierra Watch. It was an EIR. They were significant, unavoidable noise impacts, but they were proposing to reduce impacts, not to reduce them to a level of insignificance, but to reduce them. And that language, where feasible, was seen as impermissibly vague. And that's, it's a recent case, so it was 2021.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that.
But these, to me, are not specific, not enforceable, and are impermissibly.
Yeah, getting back to our conversation earlier, if these are things that you feel are inadequate, then when you're looking at the EIR, you say that it doesn't fully comply with CEQA, as you guys understand. I always say you guys, I'm sorry, the commission.
It's okay.
I tend to be a lot more informal. Yeah.
We're very informal here.
You have the option to basically provide direction to relook at that and find out if you want us to be more concrete in those mitigation measures. That's absolutely in your purview to give us that direction.
Thank you. That's helpful. And I had a few questions about vibration. That's right. I'm on a roll. About vibration impacts, and this is from the recirculated draft EIR. I just was wondering, so on page 14, it talks about the kinds of, and this is for the consultants, I think. It talks about, the different building types, like construction types, and how vulnerable they are to the PPV, the peak particle velocity. And so there's reinforced concrete, steel, or timber, engineered concrete and masonry buildings, non-engineered timber and masonry buildings, buildings that are extremely susceptible to vibration damage. There are 2 buildings in really close proximity to the site. And where are they in this? There's the building owned by the gentleman who spoke, the automobile service place, and then there's the house that is 3 feet from the property line. Because there's a wide difference in their vulnerability, in the vibration threshold guidelines. I couldn't find any statement that said one of these buildings is this and the other building is this. Is that? I'm assuming that the automotive place is a stronger building than the little 500 square foot.
I think that's a safe assumption.
Okay. And then on page 18, this is still the recirculated EIR. Oh, I'm sorry, page 22. So it mentions that the maximum vibration level that they're going to experience, I think, for the commercial property is going to be 0.995, and for Gardena is going to be 0.492. Those are quite a bit over the guidelines for that I just read from on page 14. I'm assuming, 0.995 is over even the most stable structure, which I think was 0.5. 0.492 is almost at 0.5 for the most stable structure, but in fact is much lower. This is probably a slightly more rickety building. Also, it wasn't clear to me on number 14, what is the distance when you're talking about PPVs? Here it's 0.995 at 5 feet, 0.492 at 8 feet. Do you guys know what the distance is for the measurements, for the guidelines?
The SWCA is the peer review consultant who they are not the vibration consultants that prepared the document.
Okay.
I can try to read into this document a little bit further. And it does concede, yes, it does say it would exceed the criteria for the level of significance for those two, exactly what you talked about, with the distances of 5 and 8 feet, which is identifying the auto building at 1638 South Central and then also 1616 Gardena. But I know it's summarized with the mitigations measures of number 2 would avoid construction and vibration damage. However, will exceed the applicable noise annoyance criteria for the residents. And I can kind of try to read this a little bit further, but.
I think there just needs to be more information. So I think maybe that the consultant who did I'm surprised that they're not here, given that, vibration impacts when you have buildings that are 5 and 8 feet seem to me like a pretty significant risk. In fact, on the final EIR, page 17 says, and this is an answer to one of the letters, vibration has the potential to cause damage to the commercial building to the north of 1638 at 1638 South Central and 1616 Gardena if large construction equipment operates within 15 feet of the building facade. And so 5 feet is being used as a measure. So there are just inconsistencies here that I think I think there needs to be more information before we take action on.
So you can, if you reject the EIR, that means it needs to be redone, right?
I think we can direct. I think I thought was what Eric Kraus was saying, is that we can direct that we need more information, and that as presented, that the mitigation measures seem not specific and unenforceable. It'd be nice to have a discussion in the context of the case that I brought, but also there's just not information here, like about these vibration impacts and what even kind of construction those buildings are and how vulnerable they are.
Mr. Kraus?
Yeah, Commissioner Yurka, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. So what I was alluding to, so if you don't believe that the EIR is adequate and satisfies the requirements of CEQA, you can certainly give us direction to make changes to the document so that it gets to a point where you believe it satisfies CEQA. But we'd really ask that you provide us with pretty specific ideas of what it is you want us to do to make sure that when we come back, we can actually have something that's certifiable. If that makes sense.
It's more specific than what I've been giving?
To like specific areas of the thing. Like if you're saying that you don't believe the word feasible should be used as mitigation measures, then we'll have to go back to those and try to look at alternative ways to provide mitigation. It might be that some of those mitigation measures just come out because if there may not be something else that we can put in its place in order to change that. So,
I think a definition of feasible
Sure,
would help.
yeah.
I mean, and I think the definition of feasible is going to change based on, because, for example, for the truck routes, I mean, I'm not convinced that that's not something that could be worked out in advance, especially given the location of the property. I don't think it has to go through residential neighborhoods in order, no matter where the landfill is, or if it does, then it should say, it's going to have to go through this neighborhood, and that would be.
Likely would have to go down Gardena or one of those streets to get out to San Fernando onto the freeway. Sure, so it's going to, pass. That's probably the only residential-ish
So
street. Even though it's not a residentially zoned street, there are
Right.
residents on that street. So
Yeah, so it would pass by 1616 Gardena and then the
probably
house
go
on
up,
Bonita.
Gardena off to the
Okay.
freeway from San Fernando. That's the likely route it would take.
So to get you your list of specified concerns, is that something you would need, well, specifically Ms. Yurka in this case, to provide tonight during this hearing, or is it something that she could then email to you in the next day or two with regard to the concerns that we have about the?
I think it has to come from the commission as a whole. I don't believe that we can do it as something, as an email.
Okay.
But I mean, in terms of, I'm sorry, in terms of the level of specificity, I think what Ms. Yurka is giving us, I think that would certainly be sufficient.
Okay, I guess I should ask this question.
Yeah.
Is someone making notes?
Oh, well,
Has someone been making
to
notes
be honest
this
with you,
evening?
I'm not a good note taker, but
Right.
I will go
So,
back and watch the hearing
Casey, you've been
over and over
taking
again.
extensive notes on all of her concerns for the EIR. Okay.
I'm like trying not to use any paper or anything else, so I'll just go back and watch the tape typically.
Okay. I guess that was mainly what my concern was.
Yeah,
was do you have enough information just from this meeting, or do you need something additional provided to you?
She's been pretty specific on the noise mitigation, and then we need to provide a little bit more information, sounds on terms of proximity to the buildings and where the equipment that causes the vibration is going to be used in proximity to the buildings, that sort of thing.
Okay. Any other things for them to consider for the EIR?
I do, but these aren't questions, these are comments.
Well, I mean, I think at this point, maybe it would be, if you don't mind, maybe you could make a motion for us related to the EIR that would include whatever the issues are that you think need to be cleared up. That would help, certainly would help me understand how we could move forward with this.
Can I make a comment?
Yes, of
Before
course.
we go there? And I'm not sure where to direct this, but if I'm understanding, our only options tonight are on the design review to return for redesign, approve, or approve with conditions. And we have to make a decision. Would that be correct, Ms. Van Muyden? Right. So we have to make a decision on that. We've heard the applicants say that if we return for redesign, they're just going to bring the same project back. And if I understood, when that project comes back, all we can do is approve or deny it. And it sounds to me, based on where we're going and the fact that we are the Historic Preservation Commission, we're going to deny it. So I think the EIR becomes moot because there will be no project, and there's no need for us to make any comments on the EIR or ask for revisions. In fact, the applicant has asked us to deny the EIR and deny the requested demolition. So, I think your comments and questions are very constructive in reviewing an EIR, but I'm thinking in the context of what we know from the applicant, it sounds to me like this project is not happening. So I don't think we need to go down the path of asking for revisions to the EIR.
This will be appealed to council, and so I think
my understanding is that it can only be appealed to council upon approval of a design. So if we do return it for redesign, and they've already told us, basically, we're not redesigning it.
Right.
So they'll come back
Okay.
with the same design, and all we can do is approve or deny. And presumably we're going to deny. So the project is essentially not happening, and that's been established, and it can't go to council or I thought only upon approval of a design it could go to council.
If we deny it in that second stage, if
Or
we deny
denial.
it, then it can go to council.
Okay.
And
Okay, but I don't think we're, I don't,
So then
I don't
guess-
think we're going to be approving the design. They're not changing it. They've told us that. They're not changing it. So they've basically said we're going to appeal it to council.
But then what do you propose to do about the EIR?
Yeah,
I
that
think
seems to
we're
be your
going
concern.
to not certify the EIR and deny the demolition.
Well, we can't, remember, we can't, we don't deny the demolition. We return for a redesign suggesting.
Well, that's the motion that's recommended. So we have two parts, right? Now that I think I've gotten it. There's the design review, and then there's the environmental review. So on the design review, although I don't know where that motion comes from.
There is this one where we deny the
Well, there's the
demolition.
motion to not certify the FEIR and deny the demolition, but that does not return
Yeah, that's.
for redesign. So can someone help us
Yeah.
understand where that happens? Oh, number 7, that's an
motion
alternative
providing
motion.
Direction to staff. So we could create our own.
So we would just move to return for redesign. Okay.
I think it then,
But I'm sorry, then what do you propose for the EIR?
I propose number 2, that we do not certify it and that we deny the requested demolition
Okay.
associated.
Then I'll finish my comments if we're
Right.
going to not certify it, because we need to make findings and we need to have evidence.
So if we deny the EAR, they've requested that they have direction to make changes to the EAR that would satisfy
This will be quick.
Okay.
And I mean, I do think that I do think that the questions I've raised about noise and vibration, I think, do constitute evidence necessary to make findings. But I did have some concerns about the analysis, the historic resource analysis. I find the logic that because that the Craftsman and Garage are from 1920 and 1923, and therefore they cannot contribute to the historic status of the property, I find that completely unpersuasive. And what I wish had happened in the EIR, it's not as though, I know that Tropico was annexed to Glendale in 1918, but it is not as though because Tropico lost a political identity, that it lost an identity as a neighborhood and as an area. And to suggest, and to suggest, as was mentioned at some point in the historic resource analysis, that that this site is deeply compromised because a garage and a Craftsman were added in 1920 and 1923, just suggests to me how preposterous that logic is. I do think that the better argument would be to say that the 1923 Craftsman is altered. And so perhaps for that reason, it would not qualify as a historic resource. What I would have liked is just for it to be treated as part of the property, but also as, for it to be the part of the project demolition. And so I just wanted to make that point. I'm not indicating that has to be part of a revised EIR, but I do have concerns about the study of cumulative impacts. I thought that the claim that there are no other Craftsmen that have been demolished or proposed for demolition in Tropico is just an insufficiently narrow area to examine for cumulative impacts. Everyone knows that Glendale has faced a loss of numerous Craftsman properties. And, you know, the city of Glendale, it hasn't done a specific survey for Tropico. It hasn't done a specific survey for Craftsman properties in Tropico, but it did do a 2007 Craftsman survey in multifamily areas. Now, this property was not included in it, but there were lots of properties that were missed, including the pair of clipped colonial craftsmen on Hawthorne that were also in multifamily zones, but were not picked up in the survey. So we have evidence. I'm sorry, can you guys please be quiet while I finish? Sorry. I do think that you know, it says the consultant suggests that's not a relevant context, but of course it's a relative context because it's one the city has already chosen to analyze. So I do think that I did find the cumulative impacts analysis insufficient and the rationale for focusing just on the Tropico area wrong. So that, but that's me, but we can discuss it as a commission. That's it.
Okay. So you're good with your comments on the EIR? Thank you, Catherine. Okay, at this point, it sounds like you might be ready to make a motion. Unless anybody else has some comments. Any last comments?
Is there language for a motion to deny certification of the EIR? Because I know we have the resolution for certification and project approval and accepting. Sorry, yeah, I don't have all my documents. I don't have the agenda.
Specifically says we can motion to not certify FEIR and deny the requested demolition associated with the proposed project.
And do we need a statement based on the findings, or is that good enough? Is it implied that it's based on the feedback received?
We could amend that motion to include the statements you made regarding the areas you feel the ER is inadequate, and we can amend that based on that, and then we can bring that motion back to you guys to make, or somehow, I guess, I don't even know how that works, Jillian, in terms of sharing that motion with you guys so that.
Well, we can make that motion now, can't we?
Sure, yeah. And then we would amend that motion to include that language.
Right.
Yes. If that's adequate.
She went like,
okay.
Explain this to me.
Okay, good.
Because I'm confused on, I was very confused with the 7 motions that were presented in the report, and then the 3 things you said later we have to follow one of the 3. Or the 7. And we're hung up on number 2 or number 7. I'm not sure how that addresses one of the 3. So I want to clarify.
Because number 7 is one we're writing ourselves.
Sure, June, can you turn your mic on, please?
The first step is number 2, and then the 3 things follow after.
And then 3 things are going to be addressed in item 7.
I'm sorry, do we, if we were to make this motion, do we just say that incorporating the concerns that were raised by Commissioner Yerka?
Including all comments from the commission.
From the commission, yeah. We don't need to
expressing
name her.
concerns or about the adequacy of the environmental impact report.
Okay.
So that would be number 2. It'd be that simple. It's all on the record. We have a recordation. We have notes that are being taken, and it will be incorporated into the discussion and any further work that is done on the project and on the environmental document. So that's that's number 2. And then number 7 is the open option for you to select one of the 3 within your decision-making jurisdiction, and that would be the return for redesign approval with conditions, which if you're adopting number 2, you won't be approving the project with or without conditions, so it would be a return for redesign.
And those are 2 separate motions to be voted on separately?
They are. It's in the listing, it is the number 2, that's the one motion that we're going to modify.
I have the language.
And then number 7.
Okay, so
And
it's
so
2
we
different
can
motions.
fill in the blank, so there's only 2 motions based on what I think staff is hearing at this point is the direction that you want to take.
Okay, thank you so much. So
Yes.
I'm happy
Hold on 1
to
second,
make,
sir. Are you still not clear?
I guess we can talk amongst ourselves. The 2 motions, are they both appealable?
No.
No. Okay.
No. Right, Catherine? No. No, I mean,
I don't, based on what Ms. Van Meiden said, I don't think so.
No,
Yeah.
because we haven't gotten to that stage yet. Nothing that we do at this stage is appealable. They have to come before us one more time before we make a final decision.
All right.
So before I make any motions, I just want to take a minute to formally say that I understand the city's goals and needs for additional housing. But my priority as a member of the Historic Preservation Commission is historic preservation. So the South Glendale Historic Resources Survey found 1642 South Central to be an increasingly rare example of early residential development in Tropico. The house is considered individually eligible for listing in the Glendale Register under Criterion 1 for its association with the development of Tropico. And for that reason, I cannot support demolition of a rare historic resource. So with that, I will make a motion to not certify the FEIR and deny the requested demolition associated with the proposed project. And I do want to take a moment to thank the applicant for your candor and for sort of just being really upfront about where you are on this.
Can we,
I'll second.
Oh, sorry. I need to make a motion to not certify the FEIR and deny the requested demolition associated with the proposed project, including all comments from the commission expressing concern about, to incorporate and include all comments from the commission expressing concern about the EIR.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Roll call, please.
Oh,
sorry.
you should ask, I mean, I did all the talking. Do you have comments?
No, I think we got through that part.
Okay. It was all me, all the time.
Roll, Commissioner Yurka?
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan?
Yes.
Commissioner Doom?
yes.
Commissioner Vartanian?
Yes.
Chairperson Cragnani?
Yes.
Okay, and then I will make the next motion, which will be, I move that the HPC return the project for redesign.
Do I have a second?
A redesign that does not involve demolition of the historic 1913 Craftsman. Is that a friendly amendment?
A redesign that does
Demolition.
not
Yeah, that doesn't involve the demolition of.
involve demolition.
Of
Okay.
historical properties.
Okay, we can make a motion for that. They've already said that's not going to happen, but. Okay, so I move that the HPC return the project for redesign, which includes a design that does not incorporate demolition of the historic Craftsman at 1642 South Central.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Yurka?
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan?
Yes.
Commissioner Doom?
Yes.
Commissioner Vartanian?
Yes.
And Chairperson Cragnani?
Yes. All right, moving on. I'm looking at the agenda and I realize I skipped oral communications inadvertently. Do we have any calls?
We did not have any callers.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And do we have any updates?
We do not.
Okay. Mr. Morgan, I'm going to ask for you to repeat the names of who we are.
I have one thing we left off, Commissioner Morgan. You had the flyer up there for the Friends of Rockhaven announcement.
Oh, sorry, we're not adjourning. We have another announcement.
I've got to find it. Hang on. It seems so lame now after all your brother's work.
Night.
There it is. All right.
There we go.
Mr. Morgan.
Did you know that Rockhaven, as of January of this year, is 100 years old?
Wow.
And the Friends of Rockhaven are having a centennial celebration, a dance party, with Howling Hobo DJ, will be spinning his favorite records for our dancing pleasure all evening. Join us for hot jazz, jive, and sweet goodness Saturday, January 28th, 2023, from 7 to 10 p.m. They request a $10 donation at the American Legion Hall, 4011 La Crescenta Avenue, Glendale, California, 91214.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan.
I'm going to go.
Are you going to go? How cute. Will you put up the slide just before that, please?
I am so sorry. I already know that I have a conflict, but I would have loved to show up for some hot jazz and jive.
With that, I'm going to adjourn the meeting in the names of Francis Jean Maluccio and Dr. Lloyd Hitt. We thank them for all their service, and we are adjourned at 8:34.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.